Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. Months later, I can remember all of them, down to the slightest peculiarities and habits. They were my friends, and now they're gone. There's an emptiness in my life where they once were. Sometimes I'll recall something they said or did, and it hits me like a freight train. They're gone now, and I'm left with only memories. I apologize for the melancholy tone as I begin, but I think this is the only way I can properly introduce my story and explain why I feel compelled to write this down. I believe writing this is the only way I can learn to accept what happened. I'll try to keep these depressing thoughts to myself as I record all of this, but I can't make any promises. I know that being the third wheel in a group can be uncomfortable, but I can tell you something worse: being the fifth wheel. If you're the third wheel, your group is at least a semi-functional tricycle. If you're the fifth wheel, you're just some forgotten automobile part from the 60s that nobody remembers or cares about. Imagine being unable to follow the inside jokes and shared experiences of one couple. Then multiply that feeling by 2. Being stuck as the fifth wheel is twice as bad. That was my mindset as we all crammed into Mike's SUV to drive to Adirondack Park for our hiking trip. I realize that's a strange way to begin after my gloomy introduction, but I want you to understand my frame of mind. I'm not entirely sure how to describe everything that happened, but I know I need to tell someone. I need someone else to know what occurred and help me process it all. I think the only way I can properly explain would be to help you see things from my perspective as much as possible. So there we were, driving up to the Adirondacks for a hike, with me feeling like the fifth wheel squeezed between 2 of Mike's friends I barely knew. 3 of us were packed into the backseat, while Mike and his girlfriend sat up front. Looking back at that pointless bit of self-pity back in August 2016, I see it as one of the last normal moments I would experience in my life. I really did try to make the best of the situation. Mike was always the more outgoing of us. Our mom used to say that Mike could make friends with anyone, while I tended to keep my friends once I made them. It was one of those motherly reassurances meant to comfort a socially awkward child that nothing was wrong. Unfortunately, it would take me almost 19 years to realize that wasn't true. Instead of using my therapist's diagnosis of social anxiety disorder after a breakdown at a work, gathering as a reason to seek treatment, I used it as an excuse to isolate myself from the world. I stayed in my apartment when I wasn't working and convinced myself I was just doing what was best for me. Of course, Mike decided that wasn't healthy and persuaded me to go on a weekend-long hiking trip with him. It wasn't until I showed up at his house at 6 in the morning on Friday, having taken the day off work, that I discovered he had invited others along. I think he saw it as a way to help me and break me out of my shell. Unfortunately, with Mike's extroverted nature, he didn't understand that I liked being in my shell. It was comfortable. A turtle doesn't appreciate having its shell broken. After a brief introduction where I caught no one's name except those I already knew, my brothers and his girlfriend Lisa, due to morning grogginess and the rushed introductions, We loaded up the car and headed for our hike. It took 4 hours of mostly awkward silence to reach our destination. Mike tried to start conversations, but my short responses and everyone else's sleepiness killed them quickly. We found the parking area near High Peaks Wilderness. As we unpacked our gear, we took a moment to admire the beautiful view before us. It's incredible to think about the massive forces that shaped these mountains millions of years ago, creating such a stunning landscape. Given that the parking lot was empty except for us, we would later find out why. And I needed some social lubrication. We split a 6-pack of beer and took in the majesty. The dense forest stretched out below us, with mountains rising in the distance like sleeping giants. As we finished our beers, got everything ready, and used the restrooms, Mike explained in detail which trail we would be taking. What we didn't know, and what my brother had failed to mention, was that the North Trail had been closed all summer due to several tourist disappearances. To be honest, the path itself wasn't particularly dangerous. They had simply closed it while investigating the disappearances, so it would be a bit more rugged since it hadn't been maintained. While it wasn't perilous in itself, it did prevent us from encountering other hikers, which would cause us significant problems when we actually needed help. Mike figured we could cover about 2 to 3 miles per hour and would be able to complete the Adirondack Loop, which was about 30 miles long, with enough time to get back on Sunday and be ready for our respective jobs on Monday. With no one any wiser that we had backpacked through a closed section of the park. Since his explanation was heavy on names and locations, some of which I can't clearly recall, I'll simply say this was the path we planned to take. If you plan to follow along with our route as I recount this experience, all I can say is good luck. Even as I stare at maps now, I feel just as lost as I was then. I was just following the group and trying to keep a positive attitude about everything. I wanted to make a better effort to get to know Mike and Lisa's friends. I think my circumstances had finally begun to sink in. I had been living in a quiet apartment in New York for over a year and had no friends. I would go to work and then home without doing anything else. Sometimes I would spend the entire weekend without saying a single word to anyone or seeing another person. I knew that if I didn't change something quickly, that solitude would become my normal life, and that frightened me. Our first day was relatively quiet. We spent most of the time taking in the sights, soaking up the sun, and breathing the fresh air. The hike felt like we were constantly moving upward. Being unaccustomed to hiking, I frequently fell behind, but never completely lost sight of my brother's friends. While we took a break under the shade of a maple tree whose bark reminded me of a weathered face with deep wrinkles and character, I tried to make small talk with everyone. I fell into an easy conversation with Mike and Lisa about their work and what they had been up to lately. When it came time to talk to the other two, I only managed to keep the conversation going for a few sentences before it withered and died. I assured myself that it would be easier when we stopped for the night. We rested for a while before continuing our ascent up the ridge. This was where everyone realized how truly out of my element I was. The path up the ridge was agonizing for me. It seemed to never stop climbing, and there was limited shade to keep the sun from beating down on us. I was sweating profusely, panting, and wheezing whenever they stopped to wait for me to catch up. I tried to pretend I didn't notice their exasperated whispers or sidelong glances. But that was easier said than done. They seemed like the outdoorsy type who had been doing this sort of thing for years. By the time our paths started to level out, I was ready to turn around and leave. It wasn't until we reached the top and looked out over everything that I realized how foolish that idea was. Even if I could convince Mike to give me the keys and let me walk back to the car and go home, I had no idea where I was going or what trail markers we had been following. I imagined splitting off from the group and trudging through poison ivy, stumbling upon an aggressive bear, or getting lost in the dark and wandering in circles until exhaustion and exposure claimed me. Even if I did manage to hike back to the parking lot, where would I go? Would I return to my empty apartment, microwave a hot pocket, and feel sorry for myself again? I decided to tough it out and continue hiking. We made camp at a dry section of Eagle Creek after having hiked a decent distance. Mike was confident that we would make it back on Sunday, and that the next few days would be less strenuous. We ate some food and stored the rest in a bear bag hung from a tree away from camp. We were passing a bottle of whiskey around in front of a campfire we had built when the conversation shifted to the most embarrassing moments everyone had experienced. Mike retold his story about the first time he met Lisa at a bar where he was too drunk for his own good and ended up throwing up into her purse. Lisa cringed at the memory and jokingly called Mike a jerk for that. Each person shared their stories about an awkward first kiss where their braces got locked together, getting locked out of their dorm rooms in their underwear, their cringe-inducing high school goth phase, and taking care of their drunk boyfriend who puked into their favorite bag. Then the bottle came to me, and it was my turn to tell a story. I instantly knew what my most embarrassing story was the moment we started the conversation. I didn't tell them about the door, though. Instead, I made up a story about ripping my pants in front of a group of people during a job interview that I had probably stolen straight from a 90s sitcom. They laughed with me, and I felt like a fraud. They had bothered to reveal their most embarrassing moments and were bonding over their shared experiences. And here I was too afraid to tell them the truth, to tell them about the door. The conversation continued for a bit afterward as we finished the bottle. When it was empty, we all went to bed still pretty drunk after extinguishing the campfire. I woke up in the middle of the night, desperately needing to use the bathroom. Still a bit hazy from the Buffalo Trace whiskey, I stumbled out into the woods to do my business. It wasn't until I was almost done that Megan's voice cut through the darkness. She asked me if I had a lighter. Since I hadn't heard her approach, the sound of her voice made me jump. It would have scared the piss out of me had I not just gone to the bathroom. I mumbled something about having a lighter back at camp. She told me that she had dropped hers and asked me to help her look for it. But I was too out of it to be any good to anyone, so I told her that we'd look for it later. I vaguely remember her mumbling a protest as I stumbled back to my sleeping bag. It wasn't until I woke up the next morning that I realized how foolish I had been. Apparently, they had heard howling in the surrounding woods all last night. They thought that the sound could have possibly belonged to eastern coyotes, but no one was sure. Mike knew that they inhabited the area, but were uncommon to encounter. I turned pale at the thought of being attacked by a coyote while out peeing in the middle of the woods. I decided next time I would wake up Mike before going out in the woods to answer nature's call. We packed up a while later after a light breakfast and continued our hike. The second day was a little better. The overbearing sun I suffered under previously was hidden behind heavy clouds. We crossed several streams as we followed the ridge junction. We went along Pine Valley as we headed toward Beaver Lodge, which was toward the end of the hiking loop. As the path hadn't been cleared, we frequently had to dodge patches of poison ivy and stinging nettles. I fared much better on this hike, and despite nursing a slight hangover, I felt like I was doing a much better job of getting around with my pack and clunky boots my brother had loaned me. We made camp around midday and purified some water from a nearby stream boiling and adding iodine tablets to it. As the last section of our hike didn't have many opportunities for drinkable water, I think that perhaps our encounter the previous night with the howling coyotes had added a bit of seriousness to the hike, as there wasn't as much joking around or conversation this night. We talked a little bit, but mainly just had something small to eat while we stared into the campfire. Mike and Lisa were the first to call it a night. I stayed up with the others for a bit, but we were mainly silent. The other two slowly went off after a while, and I decided to enjoy the warmth a bit longer before getting ready for bed. Just as I had finished dousing the fire, I remember Jason coming up to me and asking for the map. He told me he wanted to plan out the rest of our trip, and that there was a waterfall nearby that we should really visit that wasn't too far out of the way. I grabbed the map from Mike's pack and gave it to him before turning in. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mike rummaging through his bag. He sounded increasingly angry the longer he searched. He knocked cooking gear against each other as he peered deep into the pack for something he was missing. Frustrated that he wasn't finding the item he was looking for, he turned the bag upside down and dumped out everything. He was practically ready to tear out his own hair, and it seemed like he had spent the entire morning looking for that one thing. Wanting to know what was going on, I walked up to him and we started talking. He asked me, "Hey man, have you seen the map anywhere? I can't seem to find it. Where's Jason?" I gave him the map last night so he could map out a little detour on the trip so we could visit a waterfall. "Why don't you ask him?" "He probably knows," I answered. It was then that Mike said something that changed everything. "Jason. Who are you talking about? Do you mean David? Don't tell me you thought his name was..." I explained. "No, I'm talking about Jason. Tall guy, kind of lanky. You're joking, right?" He looked confused for a few seconds and made a questioning sound like a really old computer trying to process something moments before it crashes. The pieces clicked and Mike shouted, "Who the fuck is Jason?" getting the attention of everyone in the area. Some fucking guy asked you for our map in the middle of the night, and you just gave it to him. You handed our stuff to some random stranger you met in the woods." I tried to explain myself and tell him that I knew Jason, and that he did too, since I remembered hiking with him the day before. But I couldn't find the words to convey that point. It was here that Lisa stepped in and asked what was going on. Mike vented bitterly, "How fucking stupid are you, Alex? Some random guy named Jason comes up to you in the middle of the night asking for our stuff, and you just give it to him. Jesus Christ. We needed that map to navigate smoothly since the trails out here haven't been maintained." Mike shouted for about 15 minutes while everyone became aware of our situation. Lisa managed to calm him down enough so we could figure out our next move. While we weren't completely lost, since Mike had memorized a large portion of the trail markers, it was going to be much harder to navigate the necessary junctions to bring us back around to our car. We packed up all our stuff, making sure that the guy hadn't taken anything else, and we left. During the entire hike, I could feel Mike's eyes boring into me. The last time I had seen him this furious was just before he got into a fight with Tyler Brunswick and beat him badly. He got suspended for a week, and Tyler got a black eye, a busted lip, and never said anything about our mother again. Each time we came across a fork in the path, we spent a few minutes while Mike tried to remember which way to go. The fact that the trails had been closed and the paths were overgrown only made everything more difficult. I think that's how we made a wrong turn and began wandering on the ghost trail. I don't actually know if that's where it went wrong since we didn't have the map at that time. But that's my best guess, further away from safety. By midday, tensions had reached a critical point. Mike frequently muttered things that would make a sailor blush, while Lisa tried to hide the fact that she was close to tears. David attempted to lighten the situation by telling everyone that we just had to follow the compass, and we would get home safe and sound. David's girlfriend didn't say much. She just stared quietly at her feet as she walked. I think she had the right idea, since Ray was constantly misplacing his footing and stumbling. He looked like he had downed a fifth of vodka, and was now trying to walk home on a tightrope, while being randomly shocked with a cattle prod. The realization twisted something deep inside me and made me want to throw up. I stopped walking and began talking to Ray. "What's going on with you, man?" Mike, still furious with me, took this opportunity to vent a bit. "Huh? What are you talking about now?" Ray is stumbling and twitching all over the place. "What's wrong with Hi? Don't be a jerk, man. You know he has multiple sclerosis. We told you before the hike started about his condition." As soon as he said it, the events came rushing back to me as clear as day. I recalled Mike pulling me aside and telling me about his friend's diagnosis, and how this was likely going to be his last opportunity to undertake a long hike like this. So we had to help him and move slowly. I remembered watching him scramble up the trail and thinking about our own mom and her illness. It brought back bittersweet memories of birthday wishes given to us from hospital beds, and hearing her sob quietly to herself in the middle of the night when she thought we were asleep. Guilt flooded over me, and I stepped forward to apologize to Ray when it happened. Ray growled at me the instant I took a step forward, and he dropped to a hunched position on his hands and feet. It almost looked like his skin was bristling at a possible threat, and I could see his broken and decaying teeth as he hissed at all of us before taking off at a hopping stride into the woods. He moved like one of those CGI monstrosities from the last Planet of the Apes movie. His shaky and unstable balance was replaced by a more natural and animalistic gait as he loped into the distance and disappeared among the trees. The last thing I saw was what I assumed were his clothes, sloughing off his body, revealing that they weren't actually clothes, but gray folds of skin. David was the first to speak. "Wah, what the foo?" As soon as David said those words, it was like a switch had flipped that set everyone to panic mode. We began to run along the trail as if it would do us any good. The only thought in my head was to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. I think it took a good 15 minutes for us to run out of energy with our heavy packs and the disorienting nature of the woods. As we tried to catch our breath, I surveyed the area around us and came to a terrible realization. In our panic, we had run off the path and were now even deeper in the woods. We tried to make sense of what we saw, with Mike mumbling the same phrase over and over. What the hell was that? The short answer is that it was Ray. The long answer is this: there was no Ray, not really. I'm sorry for interrupting the story in the middle like this, but I think now is the best time to try and explain everything. I know how confusing this all seems with Jason and Ray. The truth is, I did that because I don't think I could have appropriately explained it to you without you first experiencing it from my perspective. I don't know what to call those things, but they do something to your mind. They insinuate themselves into your memories. They wrap themselves up in a wall of your recollections. And even though you know something is wrong, you can't quite put your finger on it. Your group of 4 friends could grow to 5, and you wouldn't be any the wiser. You look at it and recognize the face. You remember events. You remember getting drunk at a bar together. You remember them crying on your shoulder after a tough breakup. You remember everything that happened between you, but none of it's true. I don't know how it does it. It crawls into your head somehow and makes you see things in a way that benefits them. It can mold memories, but it can't mimic human movement perfectly. It walks on 4 claws, not 2 feet. It growls, hisses, and snarls. It doesn't talk. It infiltrates, observes, and waits. It was hunting us and trying to drive us deeper into the woods. It was succeeding. We never really reached much of a conclusion about what that thing was, but we did reach a consensus that we had to get out of there as soon as possible. I watched Mike as he looked around at the forest and came to the same realization that I did. We were lost. He didn't tell the others. I think he realized that panicking would only get us in more trouble. Instead, he told us to follow him. With the shock of our encounter setting in, we could do nothing but follow his lead and hope it all worked out. As we walked, we could hear the sounds of distant animals yowling and calling out to each other. The terror of our situation deepened as the others whispered that those were the same noises they had heard the first night out in the woods. Whatever this thing was, it was following us and calling out to other things in the area. At the time, I couldn't stop thinking about one of them barreling out from the underbrush and sinking its black and rotting teeth into my neck before the rest of the group could react. I remember brushing the thought off and mentally reassuring myself that there were 6 of us here, and we had only actually encountered one of those creatures. As the day wore on and we seemingly wandered south in an attempt to pick up another trail that would lead us back to the parking lot, I couldn't help but shake a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. It felt like I had forgotten some important deadline that I should never have forgotten. It wasn't until David mentioned his wish of being back in the car that Lisa stopped dead in her tracks. We all turned toward her, but we knew what was coming the second she asked. We only took 1 car down, right? Mike snapped, more fearful than frustrated. Of course we did. Remember how cramped everyone was in that SUV with all our camping gear smashed in the trunk and on our laps. What about it? Lisa went white, as if this were the first time that Mike had ever raised his voice to her. She paused for a moment before asking, "How many of us are here right now, and how many does your car seat?" Mike's SUV sat 5 people comfortably, 6 uncomfortably, and there were 6 of us out in the woods at that moment. Everything happened at once. Mike swore. David's girlfriend gave a half shriek and a half gasp, while I looked wide-eyed from person to person, trying to figure out which one of us didn't belong there. Katie was the only one who managed to say something, and that was, "TSSSS me, Cat Aragal." She hadn't finished her words before her jaw popped open. I don't mean that it dropped open like she was astonished at something. It popped open like it had dislocated from her face. The space between her lips was a massive, sickly pink void of inflamed gums that was at least a foot wide. She looked at us with dead and dull eyes as she slowly raised a twitching hand up to her jaw and tried to lock it back into a more human-like appearance. She popped it back into place with a hollow-sounding squelch of meat and bone shifting, as if nothing was wrong about what had just happened, before she tried to speak again. "It's me." Mike was the first to react. He stepped toward the failed facsimile of a human and swung his walking stick at her face while yelling, "Get out of here." She hopped back from the attack in a sloppy motion and landed on all fours. Her body shuddered as if an electrical jolt had passed through her, as she slowly backed away from all of us, while facing Lisa the entire time. She hissed at us one last time, before retreating deeper into the woods with a convulsive lope. It took a moment for us all to regain our composure before we continued walking, while trying to look in every direction at once. I remember David rambling as we walked. He kept asking, although no one was responding to him, "Did you see how it moved?" It was twitching like an epileptic at a rave. You ever see one of those documentaries about mad cow disease? That thing was twitching and moving like one of those infected cows. What the hell was that thing? Was it a person? What kind of person can do that to their body? It tried to talk to us. He rambled for hours before we had to tell him to shut up because we were worried about that thing hearing us, though that really wasn't the case. We made him stop talking because it only served to frighten us more. Despite stopping for the night, none of us actually slept. We sat around a campfire and listened to the sound of high-pitched whining and yelping coming from all around us. It seemed like any time I actually got close to falling asleep, the calls would start up and jolt me awake. We spoke in hushed whispers and tried to figure out what they wanted with us, even though none of us really wanted the answer to that question. The hours dragged on almost endlessly before dawn broke, and we continued our hike. We spent Sunday hiking around and trying to find a familiar sight, without any real sense of where we were and where we were going. Our only hope was to stumble across another hiker, or find an area with a high enough vantage point that we could survey the entire area. Unfortunately, any elevations we climbed didn't afford a good view of the area, and it was extremely unlikely that we would find another hiker due to the fact that the trail had been closed and wasn't maintained. Even if we did, what were the chances that we would trust them and could be certain it wasn't one of those things? Midway through the day, Mike whispered to me, "Count the people wearing backpacks. One of them is with us again." I casually looked over my shoulder and noticed that one of our group was walking without any gear. They trailed behind us, but were still within our vicinity. They moved slowly, but didn't show any of the jerky movements of the previous two. The thought that it was learning to mimic our movements unsettled me. Without really thinking, I shucked off my backpack and approached the imposter. Before they knew what was happening, I shoved them as hard as I could. The instant my hands pressed into their shirt, I felt something slick and warm give way, like the outer layer falling off a rotten peach. Their shirt slid off their body into my hands, and I quickly realized it was their skin. The thing was actually naked, but gave the appearance of clothes by altering the color of its almost translucent skin. I dropped the skin that had sloughed off, and it hit the ground with a wet slap. The creature toppled backward and began yelping. I can only describe the sound like this. Imagine getting out of your bed in the middle of the night to go take a piss. As you are feeling your way through the darkness to get out of the room, you step on your cat's tail. Imagine that startled yelp of pain and the shock that comes along with it. Now focus on that emotion you felt when you heard that noise, that sudden surprise and guilt. In reality, the sound it made was nothing like a hurt pet. It just reminded me so much of a wounded animal that I can't differentiate the sounds. Here's the worst part. I shouldn't have felt bad. Those things were stalking and tormenting us. They were likely hunting us, and I felt bad for harming it. I shouldn't have felt bad about it, but it wanted me to, and so I did. The thing writhed on the ground on its back for a few seconds, making a pitiable noise. It reached back with its arms and pushed itself upright on its hands and on the balls of its feet. Its joints popped wetly, and its muscles and bones adjusted to fit this new position. It crab walked away while shrieking the entire time as Mike pursued it with his walking stick, hoping to catch up to it and cave its head in. It wasn't until the thing disappeared from sight that I realized that the shrieking wasn't just coming from the monster, but from Lisa as well. It was trying to mimic her response. With Mike gone and Lisa's screams possibly drawing more of those things to us, I decided that I had to do something. I stepped forward and wrapped her up in my arms. She was shaking like a leaf in the wind. I stroked her hair and whispered that it was over. She managed to choke out something about its face. All I could make out was that something was terribly wrong with its face. She calmed down as I told her that everything was going to be all right. I didn't believe that myself, but it was the only thing I could think of that might bring her comfort. Mike returned, fuming that the monster had escaped, and I awkwardly broke off the hug. Mike didn't say anything. He just started walking. We continued following him, hoping that he would find the way, but knowing that he probably wouldn't. 6 hours later, we settled down for the night. It felt like we had been going in circles all day and made absolutely no progress. For all we knew, the thing could have been tampering with our memories and convincing us that familiar landmarks were new, leading us deeper into the woods. I didn't tell the others, but I think I knew what those things wanted with us. They wanted to lead us deeper into the woods. They were trying to force us to exhaustion, and when we were too weak to defend ourselves, they would descend upon us and eat us. David was right about that. If that thing is similar to us in any way, then those twitching spasms were likely some sort of prion disorder that came from eating humans. After eating some jerky, since we decided against having a fire and drawing more of them to us, we reached the conclusion that we would have to sleep in shifts. I volunteered for the first watch because my insight into the monster's behavior had robbed me of any desire to sleep. The others went off without so much as another word. They were exhausted, and it wasn't until an hour into my watch that I realized that I was too. Even given the monster's grotesque appearance, everyone needs to sleep. Lisa joined me about 2 hours into my watch. She admitted that she couldn't sleep after our encounter with the creature. I nodded in agreement. Both of us had seen something terrible that the others hadn't. We talked for a good 30 minutes about what we thought was going on and how everyone was handling it. She was worried about Mike. She confessed that he was acting erratic and that he was scaring her. I wrapped my arm around her for a moment and told her that we were all scared. She looked into my eyes and told me that she was glad I was there. And I felt something twist deep down inside me that I had buried a long time ago when I first met her. The longer she stayed with me on watch, the more personal our conversation became. She confessed that she and Mike had been fighting a lot recently, and that she was wondering if they were going to work it all out. At the start of their relationship, they were great together. He made her feel wonderful, but there was something that didn't feel right. Like there was something missing. I listened to her talk about everything that was going on in her life, and I knew I had to do something. I knew that if I didn't do it now, I would regret it. I had to tell her about the door. She listened quietly as I told her everything. It was the event that precipitated my breakdown at work and my social anxiety disorder diagnosis at the therapist's office. Everything started off simply enough one Friday at work. I was in the break room eating my sandwich and reading a book as usual, while my coworkers talked about their plans for the weekend. One of them was having a party to celebrate his promotion, and they were inviting everyone at work. I figured that the invitation was only extended to the people he was talking to, until he asked me if I would be able to make it on Saturday. As it was the first time I had been invited to hang out after work, I chose to go. I spent all of Saturday getting ready, planning interesting topics to bring up in case there was a lull in conversation, and picking out the bottle of wine I was planning to give him as a congratulatory gift. After psyching myself up, I left to go to the party with the bottle in hand and my spirits high. I convinced myself that I was going to be the life of the party, and that maybe if I played my cards right, I could finally find a friend at work who would make the time fly by instead of dragging on. It wasn't until I reached the house that false bravado began to crumble. I parked in front of the neighbor's house, as everywhere else already had a car parked there. It was then that I felt my heart beating like I had just run a mile. I began heading up the driveway, with the wine bottle slick in my hands from my palms sweating. It wasn't until I reached the front door that I realized that something was terribly wrong. All that excitement that had been building up since Friday afternoon was now replaced with something else: apprehension. All those topics I had thought of seemed boring, and all the reassurances I had given myself seemed hollow. I didn't feel prepared for this at all. At this point, a small part of me whispered something that has stuck with me to this very day. That voice intimated that they never really wanted me to come. They had only given that invitation as a courtesy and didn't actually expect me to show up at their house. It said that if I knocked on that door, I would be making a fool out of myself. It told me that I wasn't even comfortable in my own skin. So how could I even dare to imagine that they would enjoy my company. They wanted to celebrate with their friends. They didn't want to listen to me fumble for something to talk about. All those fears flashed in front of me, taunting me, demanding that I knock on the door and make myself look like an idiot. That part of me told me that I was better off alone, and I listened. I turned around without even knocking on the door, and I left. No one had come in, and the music was playing loudly, so I doubt that they would have heard me anyway. I shouldn't have been there in the first place. Maybe I saw them watching me from the window. Maybe I didn't. Maybe they were laughing at me as I drove away, flustered and embarrassed. Maybe they went back to the party and joked about the social outcast who had seemingly freaked out and run away from their house, while I went home and cried in the shower. Maybe. Lisa listened as I told her the story. She smiled sadly as I started to cry into her shoulder. All those feelings I had experienced outside of my coworker's house came rushing back. All that fear, foolishness, and fatalistic failure crashed into me like waves on the shore. She whispered soothing words into my ear and waited for me to collect myself. Once I did, she pulled away and told me that it wasn't my fault. It was there under the moonlight, with her face inches away from mine, that I did the worst thing I had ever done in my life. I kissed her. It was slow, hesitant, romantic. I looked into her eyes and saw her beautiful face. She pulled me toward her as she leaned back. Lost in the moment, I held her against me while telling her all the things I should have said when I first met her, and realized that I loved her. I held her like that for a few moments, afraid that if I let her go, I would lose this perfect moment. She was warm. She smelled like pine and wild mint. She smelled like happiness. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt comfortable and content. I don't know when I drifted off, but I do remember waking up. In the love-drunk excitement of the previous night, I didn't think once about Mike or the consequences of my decision. I only thought about Lisa and forgot that she was his girlfriend. What I did last night was a beautiful mistake. I convinced her to cheat on him with me. I needed to tell him before the truth came out. I needed him to understand how I felt. I got up from the ground and stretched. Lisa was gone. I assumed she had gone back to her sleeping bag in the middle of the night. I walked over to Mike, who was just waking up. He rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and asked me if I had stayed up all night. The words bled out of me, and once they started, I couldn't stop. I don't know what happened, man. We were just talking one moment, and then the next, oh God, I didn't mean for it to happen. You know I love you, man. I wouldn't do anything to hurt you. It just happened, and now I can't take it back. Lisa's cry of surprise cut me off before I could go any further. Both Mike and I turned to the sound of her distress, and we knew instantly what had happened. The backpacks with our compass, food, and water had been stolen. It knew. Don't you see it, Godamnet? It knew that we could identify it without a backpack, and it couldn't shape its skin to take the appearance of one, so it stole them away from us. Now the next time it wormed its way into our group, we wouldn't be any the wiser. Lisa and I never talked that night. Lisa had never left my brother's side that night. They had zipped their sleeping bags together. She didn't open up to me about her worries, and I never actually kissed her. I poured my heart out to a thing wearing Lisa's skin while it was in my arms. I confessed my truest feelings to an ersatz entity masquerading as a person. I felt sick. The others woke up quickly after hearing Lisa screaming. We quickly searched around the area, hoping to find some scrap of food or some indication of where our stuff had been taken. We found nothing. It was long gone. We had no food, no water, and no hope. We had no way of telling when one of those things was hijacking our heads and pretending to be part of our group so it could distract us. With our compass gone, we had no means of following a set direction and hoping to pick the trail back up. In short, we were screwed with a capital S. David demanded to know what I was doing last night. He wanted to know how I could be so careless as to fall asleep when I should have been watching over them and our gear. I lied and told him that someone had come around in the middle of the night to relieve me from my shift. I didn't mention that it was one of those things impersonating Lisa. I couldn't bear to look either my brother or his girlfriend in the eyes at that point. David started to yell, but stopped when he saw I was on the verge of tears. I don't know if it was mercy or disgust that caused him to stop. It doesn't matter either way. We gathered up the only thing that they hadn't taken in the night, our sleeping bags, and continued walking. The hike without water or the prospect of food was unbearable. We were already exhausted, and the realization that we were soon going to be starving and dehydrated only served to sap more of our energy. Within a few hours, my mouth felt gummy and dry. While we were still under the canopy of leaves, the temperature was still in the high 80s and low 90s. It didn't take long for dehydration to set in. I kept licking my lips in an attempt to keep them moist, but I could feel them beginning to crack as my saliva began to dry up. As we walked, David picked up his pace and caught up with me. I looked over at him and knew without him saying anything that another one of those things had joined our group. He whispered, "Don't look directly at it. Just keep it in the corner of your eyes. I think that's how it messes with your mind. It would explain why you remember that guy that night, but the rest of us can't. You saw him, but the rest of us didn't. Don't get close. Just keep it in the corner of your eyes. It's been trailing us for about half an hour now. I think it just wants to watch and follow us." I pretended to be cracking my neck and looked at the tag-along in my peripheral vision. It trailed behind us by about a dozen feet. In its resting state, its facial features appeared staticky. I could make out eyes and a nose, but it was constantly shifting and rippling like bubbling plastic. At this point, we were too tired to even bother with chasing it off. We just kept walking and hoped that it wouldn't try to join the group. It seemed content to keep its distance and keep us in its line of sight. It followed us for about 2 miles before it broke off toward the trees with a shambling, awkward gait. We were too tired to even try and set up a shift system. We just huddled together in an attempt to convince ourselves that we were safer when we were closer together. But every time one of us got comfortable enough to drift off, those things would start making noise. The noises started off as high-pitched yips, whose sound seemed to travel for miles. As the night drew on, they grew more aggressive. I remember one time as I was drifting off hearing the grating rasp of my name, Alex. The things weren't just following us, they were learning. They were perfecting their mimicry. The thought disturbed me more than the idea of them out there, watching us in the darkness. How long would it take them to become more human than human? What would they do once they were capable of walking among people again? I drifted off to sleep with that thought beating around in my head like a man trapped inside a wall. We got up on Tuesday morning and left without a word. At this point, there was nothing left to say. Some of us had been awake all night without any food or water. The constant stress had completely worn us down. We continued hiking in the same direction. We had been going in with the false hope that we would come across someone. In the end, our hike looked more like a death march. My feet were covered in blisters that had ruptured and plastered the soles of my feet to my socks. Every step felt like I was tearing open the wounds a bit more. In an attempt to take my mind off the discomfort, I focused on my brother, who was walking in front of me. He wasn't so much walking as he was limping forward. He had stopped using his walking stick and was dragging it behind him like it was a broken limb. I watched as he stepped over a rock, and the walking stick slipped out of his hands. He kept dragging himself forward as if nothing had happened. He didn't even register it falling out of his hands. It was at that point that I knew that something was wrong. I knew that my brother wasn't my brother anymore. I quietly picked up his stick as I passed it. Katie went to call out to him and ask if he was all right, but I shushed her. I was so sure that one of those things had replaced him and was now leading us deeper into the woods. I realized that I would only have one chance at this. The instant it knew that we knew, it would try and run away. All it would take was one good swing to the back of its head, and we would be able to take out one of those things. The stick had a bit of weight to it, about 5 or 6 pounds, enough to crack open a skull if it was swung hard enough. I began walking faster while trying to avoid the underbrush that might give away my approach. The thing wearing my brother's skin continued limping forward as I drew closer. I waited until I was within swinging distance before raising the stick above my head. My heart was beating in my chest, and my palms were so sweaty that it felt like the stick would slide right out of my hands. It kept on moving forward, completely unaware of what I was about to do to it. I whispered, "I'm sorry," just before I swung the walking stick down with all my strength. Mike turned to face me as he mumbled groggily, "Sorry for what?" My muscles locked, and I stopped mid-swing. The stick stopped just inches away from his face. He blinked in surprise before muttering, "Alex, what's wrong?" His voice sounded distant and empty, like he was between a waking and sleep state. It was then that I knew the extent of his condition. He was pale and looked like the slightest breeze would blow him over. He wasn't one of those things. He was delirious from dehydration, sleep deprivation, and starvation. The walking stick fell out of my hands and bounced on the ground next to us. I dragged my tongue across my lips, and it felt like I was licking sandpaper. I whimpered, "Jesus, Mike. I thought you were one of those things. Oh God, I'm so sorry." He didn't react to my apology. He just turned around and continued walking in the direction we were going in. Katie just watched everything unfold numbly before she started following him. David shook his head sadly, but he didn't look any better. His eyes were glazed, and his lips were cracked and red from rubbing at them. I watched my brother shambling forward, and it reminded me of one of those old zombie movies where someone is put into a trance and forced to walk until they die from exhaustion. His mouth hung open, and he moved like he was being dragged along on puppet strings. I picked up the walking stick and began to follow them. I wondered how much longer he had left in him, and what any of us could do if he just fell over and stopped walking. I wondered how much longer any of us had. I don't know how long we walked. Everything melted together in a muddled malaise at that time. I remember losing my footing and tripping a few times, but I barely felt it. The third time, I didn't even realize I was lying on the ground until David stepped on me as he was passing by. There was no apology. He was too far gone to recognize what he had stepped on. I dragged myself to my feet and felt lightheaded, but continued putting one foot in front of the other. The fifth time I fell, I wondered if it would have been better to just lie down and wait to die. An excited yawp behind me, from one of those things, drove me to my feet. It wasn't until we bumped into the sign for Pine Valley that I realized how close we were to salvation. The post for Pine Valley also had a branching sign that pointed in the direction for Beaver Lodge, which was only a few miles from where we started at High Peaks Wilderness if we walked along Route 22. Mike was heading in the right direction, and we were almost home free. In my excitement, I began calling to the others to let them know that the end was near. I looked around me and shouted, "Lisa, Mike, David, Emma, Katie. I know where we need to." The words died on my lips as I counted the names and realized it wasn't over yet. The others kept moving as if they hadn't heard me talking. The imposter shuffled alongside us, and for once it was easy to identify them. I don't know whether or not they had let down their guard after seeing our conditions, but this one was obvious. She moved slowly, but her movements didn't convey her exhaustion. Everyone else was sweating and looked like the walking dead, but she was fine. I waited for her to get close enough to follow the trail the others were going down before I raised Mike's walking stick and growled, "Turn around right fucking now. I can see you." She turned around slowly, and I felt my heart skip a beat. She looked almost exactly like Lisa, except for a reddish tinge to her hair. She could have been her twin. I knew what it was planning before it even opened its mouth and asked, "What are you doing, Alex?" "Don't call me that," I winced. "What are you rambling about? Please move out of the way. We're almost safe from those things." "I know what you are." Emma turned white at the realization. She began speaking quickly. "I'm not one of those things. Please, Alex, you have to remember. There were 6 of us. Those things want us to think there were only 5, so they can take one of us, without the others caring. Those things don't want us all. They only want the weakest one. Please, let's go before they catch." "Shut up," I snapped. I raised the walking stick in my hand and brandished it at her. "Think about it, Alex. Do I move like one of those things? Do I speak like them? That should be enough to prove I'm human. No. Mike's my brother, Lisa's his girlfriend. I'm your girlfriend. I sat on your lap on the car ride. Please don't kill me. Alex, I love you. Don't you remember? Alex, I love you." I lowered the stick that was in my hand as memories bombarded me. I had met her one night when my brother forced me to go out to a bar with him. Emma had been sitting at the bar all night drinking. It wasn't until she tried to stand up and fell into my arms that we actually talked. I remembered lazy Sundays, in bed watching cheesy sci-fi B-movies. I remembered holding her close to me after making love and hearing her whisper sweet nothings into my ear. I remembered our life together. I rasped Emma, "I'm so sorry. "I didn't know," she cooed. "Alex, it's not your fault." She went to touch me, and I sprang back like I had been bitten by a snake. The instant I heard those words, I swung. The stick caught her unaware, in the side of her face. I felt her jaw give way under the sudden force of my attack. She burbled through broken teeth. I lo, the second strike dented her temple as the temporal bone shattered. She kept trying to talk, but it was too late, and too much damage had been done. That door was shut to me now. I kept swinging the walking stick down on her head until it splintered and snapped. I looked up from her twitching body and saw my brother watching me in horror. "Emma, oh my God," I spoke through gritted teeth and regarded him with red-rimmed eyes. "Come on, we have to go." He went to keep talking, but I walked past him. I didn't want to explain it to him. He eventually ran ahead, invigorated with the prospect of finding rescue on the road. I looked behind me one last time. The last thing I saw was one of those things dragging away Emma's corpse. It looked emaciated and half mad with starvation. At that very moment, I wasn't afraid of the thing. I just felt pity. Whether or not it forced that emotion on me, I'll never know. I turned away and caught up with the others on Route 22. We were on the road for 15 minutes before we managed to flag down a car, and an ambulance was called for us. The doctors said that our exposure to the elements, combined with our starvation and dehydration, triggered the auditory and visual hallucinations we experienced. It's the typical response you'd be given after hearing our half-dead ramblings about creatures warping their flesh and our memories to drive us to the brink of death, so they could prey on us when we were at our weakest. We spent a week there while receiving treatments, recounting our horrific experiences, and then subsequent psychological evaluations before we were released. I tried to talk to the others about it. Mike and Lisa refused to talk with me about it. I don't really know David or Katie, so that's off the table too. They just want to forget. I can't forget. Here's the thing. I still remember Megan asking me to help her find her lighter. I recall staying up late and talking with her by the campfire while she smoked like a chimney. I can recite Jason's terrible puns that he'd make about almost everything, and Ray's determination at hiking this trail while slowly succumbing to the effects of his multiple sclerosis. I can recall whispering sweet nothings to Lisa under the glow of the full moon. I can still envision that moment clear as day, even months later. I know the conversation we had word for word. I can remember the feeling of her skin against mine, and the smell of her hair as I pressed myself against it when I reached that one true moment of connection. I remember Emma pleading and begging me not to kill her. Despite writing this all months later, I can see all of those things clearly. Sometimes late at night, I can even remember driving up to Adirondack Park with Emma sitting in my lap, playfully grinding against me, and telling me how fun our hike was going to be. Sometimes I think about that memory more than I should. Since I can't talk to my brother or Lisa about this, I had to find some other outlet. I guess I'm writing all this for that one reason, catharsis. In the end, I keep wondering if what I did was right. Did I make the right choice? I want you to read this and tell me that I had no other option, that the risk of one of them escaping into the city forced my hand. I know that's not the case. I could have walked away or tried to scare her off, but I didn't. What kind of person can look into someone's eyes, remember all the things they did and the life they had, and do what I did? Who can have all of those memories and end everything so callously? It doesn't matter if none of it was real, because in that moment it was to me. Who can look at someone and feel such love for them before you kill them? The answer to that question is simple now that I ask myself aloud. I just don't like the answer. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I visited my father Richard not long ago. We have a good relationship, just not the talkative kind. His health is starting to fade. There was a hint of melancholy in his eyes that evening. We were just sitting on his porch, each nursing a glass of whiskey without saying much, when he suddenly declared he had something to tell me. "You're old enough now, you might as well know." I had no idea what he was referring to, so I asked him. "Remember that night I came home from work completely shaken and wouldn't tell you what happened?" I did remember. It wasn't something easily forgotten. He wasn't just upset. He was terrified of something. I'd never seen Dad scared in my life until then. He was the kind of man whose bar brawls were legendary in our town. I also remember he told me never to ask about it, so I never did. What he told me that day disturbed me profoundly. I've been haunted by it ever since. I hope documenting it will help me process everything. But first, some background. When I was very young, around 4 or 5, my father and I lived in a small apartment on the ground floor of a weathered building in Black Rock Cove. I don't remember much about it, except that I didn't like it there. The other children weren't friendly. They'd take my toys without asking, and the place had a certain grimness to it. But we were going through tough times, and it was all he could afford. What stands out most in my memory was being awakened from sleep every now and then by strange sounds. A rhythmic crashing that resembled ocean waves, but somehow distorted and unnatural. I wasn't particularly worried about it at first. I just assumed the ocean was unusually loud some nights. I was 5. I didn't know anything about tidal patterns. One night, my father had invited my Uncle Gordon and his wife over for a lobster dinner. I remember it clearly because it was the first time I'd ever eaten lobster. While they were talking, I casually mentioned the loud ocean sounds from last night. Dad looked puzzled and said, "The sea was calm last night." I thought he was just joking around, so I laughed and told him how the crashing waves had woken me up. He and Uncle Gordon exchanged serious glances. That scared me, because they were always joking when they got together. They asked me more questions about the sounds, though I don't recall exactly what. But they concluded I was probably hearing the building's old pipes, or the heating system turning on and off. I suppose I believed them. But after that, I'd always get anxious when those sounds would wake me up, because I knew it wasn't just the ocean anymore. A few times I called for Dad when it happened, but by the time he'd get to my room, there was nothing to hear. He started telling me it was all in my imagination. We moved out of that apartment after about a year, when Dad's carpentry business picked up. The strange sounds stopped when we left, So I came to believe it was a combination of building noises and my overactive imagination. It wasn't something I ever dwelled on again until recently. One summer when I was 13, I was helping my father at a job site. This was a larger project, renovating an old Victorian house, so he had several other men working with us. Some I knew and some I'd never met before. I was used to it. It's how he always operated on bigger jobs. I was sitting alone, eating my lunch, and listening to my portable CD player. Dad usually skipped lunch, too absorbed in his work. Suddenly, I noticed a man walking toward me from the direction of the site. I didn't remember seeing him before, but he was walking purposefully straight toward me. He was an older guy with a shaved head, wearing a blue denim jacket. He sat down beside me, uncomfortably close, and said nothing. I removed my headphones, not wanting to be rude, and said, "Hi." He told me my father was looking for me, and I should head back as soon as I finished my sandwich. That had been the plan anyway, so I said that was fine. To make things less awkward, I complimented his jacket. He didn't seem to register the comment. After sitting with me for a few uncomfortable moments while I ate, he stood up and started walking away. I felt relieved. I was about to put my headphones back on when he stopped abruptly. For some reason, it terrified me. I froze. He turned around and fixed me with the most venomous stare I'd ever seen. I hadn't known what it felt like to be hated until then. It was as if he wanted me dead. I remember calculating what I should do if he attacked me. But he didn't attack. He just shouted, "Someone's been listening to your dreams, and I don't like it." He stalked off, leaving me puzzled and terrified. It was probably 85 degrees out, but I was shivering. I put the remainder of my sandwich away and went back to work. Later, I asked my father who that man was. He said he had no idea what I was talking about. I described the man. Dad insisted nobody like that even worked at the site. At the time, I figured it was just some random drifter with mental health issues. But now it has an entirely new meaning. Things I didn't notice before suddenly stand out. Like my sandwich was still in my lunchbox when that man spoke to me. How did he know what I'd brought for lunch? When I was 15, Dad was called out to repair some water damage at a house on the other side of Black Rock Point. Our town has two distinct areas. One side of the point has all the beaches and tourist shops. The other has the downtown and lots of rocky cliffs. The old apartment was on the beachy side. The house he was called to was partway up the cliff road leading to the next town. So he arrived in his truck with all his tools. The front yard was severely overgrown. No vehicles in the driveway, just the rusted shell of what used to be an old Plymouth. The house itself was in poor condition, but he approached the front door anyway. Before he could knock, he noticed a note telling him to come right in and that they'd be back soon. He didn't like entering someone's home without them present. He didn't want to be accused of anything. But he'd driven quite a distance, so he went ahead. He started working on repairing the water-damaged windowsills. He'd been there for nearly an hour when he thought he heard someone. He went to check. There was still no car in the driveway, except for his truck. "Hello," he called. He heard what sounded like a door closing. Dad wasn't the type to get nervous. He was a local legend for his toughness. But he told me he was starting to feel uneasy, and that just made him angry. So he began stomping around the house. He saw the back door was wide open, leading onto an overgrown yard that dropped off toward the cliff edge. He wondered if it was just the wind moving the door. He closed it and was heading back to work when he decided to check the place over. Just to be sure, he looked around downstairs. There wasn't much to see. The house was in bad shape, but it was furnished. The place was reasonably clean and tidy. The electricity still worked. Someone was definitely living there, just not keeping the place up. His concerns were mostly satisfied, but he went upstairs to look around anyway. Upstairs was much the same as down. Clean and tidy, just in need of repairs. Something didn't feel right about the place to him. Dad was never much of an intuitive person, so those must have been some serious bad vibes. The last room at the end of the upstairs hall had its door closed. It was the only closed door. It was stuck in the frame somehow, but he managed to open it. It was just a bedroom, all painted blue with matching furniture. He spotted water damage around the window frames upstairs, too. He'd been told there would only be 3 windows to repair, and this made 4. But he checked it out anyway. When he did, the sill came right off, and he saw there were small devices and other items stuffed between the walls. He'd seen all sorts of oddities in his line of work. It didn't surprise him. He pulled the objects out because he planned to repair this window too. That's just how he was. He wouldn't ask for extra money. He just wanted the whole job done properly. When he removed the items, he saw they included several mini cassette tapes and a small recorder. Dad respected people's privacy, but he happened to notice the label on one of the tapes and realized he was looking at something sinister. He started examining them. They were all similarly labeled. The date was written on the back of each tape. Every recording was of a child sleeping, the soft breathing and occasional murmurs of a little boy. Dad recognized my voice and that ground floor bedroom immediately. He remembered my stories about the strange ocean sounds. It hadn't been in my imagination at all. Someone had been recording me sleeping for almost a year. He told me there weren't any recordings of other children either. Whoever made the tapes was only recording me. He called the police, of course. The listed owner of the house was an elderly couple living in Halifax. They used it as a summer home, but hadn't visited in years. They hadn't even noticed they were still paying the electricity bill. They had no knowledge of the recordings or hiring my father. It was a dead end. I had so many questions after he told me this. Why would someone who lived so far from our apartment drive a 30-minute trip at night to record just me? How did they even know me? How did they fixate on that one apartment or child? And why call my father out to find the stash of recordings after a decade of leaving us alone? Dad actually had an answer for one of those questions. In a way, I find this creepier. Turns out he went to the wrong address. He wrote it down incorrectly. When police checked his answering machine tape for clues, he had actually been called to a much closer home by a completely innocent client. He stumbled on this house and the collection of recordings entirely by random chance. So who left the note on the front door? I tried talking to my father about it, but he wasn't in the mood. He shut the conversation down I pressed him a little about the strange sounds, and he told me I should ask Uncle Gordon. So I did. Uncle Gordon and my father get along great. Never seen them argue in my life. But they're very different. Gordon's easygoing, always joking, always kind to everyone. That's why I was shocked when he actually became angry. He told me to never ask him about it again and to leave him alone. That would have been the end of it, but my bi-weekly phone call to my mother was due, and I didn't really have anything else to talk to her about. So I told her what Dad had told me, what I remembered, and what happened with Uncle Gordon. "What were you thinking?" she scolded, typical of her. He still feels it was his fault. The hushed way she said it, like someone might overhear, sent chills through me. I didn't even know what she was talking about. There were some odd things in my family that I vaguely knew about, but no one really discussed. This is the version my mother gave me. My father and Uncle Gordon had a younger sister named Emily. I never knew her as Aunt Emily because she was gone before I was born. When Emily was 8 or 9, strange things started happening to her. My father only talked about them when he'd been drinking bourbon. Mom said bourbon made him broody. She used to hide his bourbon because it frightened her when he talked about these things. Like this one time when my father woke up because he heard noises in the kitchen. He went out to see what was happening. Emily was making a peanut butter and honey sandwich in the middle of the night. He asked her what she was doing, because if their mother caught them in the kitchen at that hour, they'd be in serious trouble. Emily told him she had to make a sandwich and record something for Husky Malo. Mom said Dad would shudder when he recounted that part of the story. His voice would drop to almost a whisper when he'd say the name. So my father became annoyed with Emily, thinking she was being silly or half dreaming. Then she showed him the cassette tape she was holding. It was a recording she'd made of the sound of someone sleeping with Gordon written on the label. My father, being the oldest child, was very protective of Gordon and Emily. He immediately sensed something was wrong. He took the tape and destroyed it, and he told Emily she had to go back to bed right away. She told him Husky Malo would be angry because she had promised him. Dad asked who this person was and what he looked like, because he intended to tell their mother. She said she didn't know what he looked like, but he talked to her through the drain in the bathroom sink. He told her all sorts of things, and she'd been talking to him every night for a month. At this point, my mother said she didn't want to discuss it anymore. It was giving her the creeps. She didn't even like saying the name. Mom was always somewhat superstitious. Like she would be afraid to say the names of certain diseases. She'd never say cancer, as if saying it might cause it. She said just saying the name Husky Malo made her feel like she was being watched. But I pressed her with more questions, and she continued. She said my father didn't believe Emily. She must have been dreaming, or just made the whole thing up. He took the sandwich and ate it himself after sending Emily back to bed, so his mother wouldn't find it. He remembered the sandwich well, because peanut butter and honey wasn't something they normally ate in their household. He had no idea where she'd heard of it. He forgot all about the incident for a few days or weeks, until one night he woke up to use the bathroom and heard unusual sounds as he approached. The light wasn't on, but Emily was in there alone. He paused outside the door to listen. She was whispering an entire conversation in there. He figured she was half asleep and confused. He went into the bathroom to get her. Then he heard it himself. There really was a voice coming from the drain. Mom said he would get a distant look when he talked about this and just set the bourbon down, like he couldn't drink anymore. And my father can always drink more. The voice he heard sounded cold and metallic. Probably from traveling through the pipes, he figured, but it terrified him. What it was actually saying was even worse. Mom said he'd try to imitate the metallic voice, saying, "Come outside, Emily, come on outside. No one has to sleep out here." Emily whispered into the sink that she couldn't because her brother might catch her. And the strange voice told her, "He never should have eaten my sandwich." Hearing it made my father's skin crawl. My mother said it's the most afraid he'd ever been. Not one to freeze up, my father pulled Emily out of the bathroom and slammed the door. He warned her never to talk to Husky Malo again because he was dangerous. He ended up telling his mother, and they found where some pipes had been tampered with under the house. They also found some cassette recordings of my father and Uncle Gordon sleeping. They were all destroyed immediately, and his mother forbade them to speak of it. They didn't handle such disturbing matters openly back then. But my father saw some of the recordings before they were destroyed. And they weren't made by Emily. I had never heard anything about any of this before. Dad and Uncle Gordon almost never mentioned Emily. And when they did, it was always cryptic. I didn't know what this had to do with me, but my hand was shaking as I held the phone. I thought she was finished, but she said that was just the beginning. My mother usually tires of conversation after about 10 minutes. I was surprised she was still talking. Maybe she needed to get it out of her system. She said that after that incident, Emily used to complain about strange ocean sounds in her bedroom. Everyone just assumed she was hearing the fog horn from the lighthouse because it was still active back then. She complained about it for nearly 2 years, saying she had trouble sleeping. Her mother got tired of it and installed thicker curtains in her bedroom, but she kept complaining. They eventually got her earplugs. Problem solved. Not long after this, Dad, Gordon, and Emily went to a friend's house to hang out because he had a stereo system, and his parents would buy him any records he wanted. They'd all just listen to music together. Emily left to go home before Dad and Gordon did, but she never made it home. They never found her body. In theory, she could still be alive, but nobody really believes that. Mom thinks Dad and Uncle Gordon always felt personally responsible, because if they'd just left with her, she might still be alive. My mother figures that's why the strange sounds upset Dad and Uncle Gordon so much. And I guess I was reopening old wounds by asking about it. At the same time, I find it extremely disturbing that the same phenomenon would happen to both me and Emily, and upsetting that it wasn't taken more seriously when it happened to me. I also felt terrible about hurting Uncle Gordon. I visited him the next day to apologize. I told him my mother had explained everything, and I really had no idea. He wasn't angry anymore. Actually, he apologized to me too, saying I deserved to know. He said there was a bit more to it than what my mother described. A week before she disappeared, Emily had started complaining about the strange sounds again. They figured either she was forgetting to use her earplugs, or it had been in her head the whole time. Then a day or two before she disappeared, he couldn't remember exactly. She woke up and her earplugs were gone. She couldn't find them anywhere. They figured she just didn't want to wear them anymore. But now he wasn't so sure. Another strange thing from around the same time was that they found footprints in the sand outside the house. It had stormed heavily overnight, washing the beach clean. These footprints led out of the cave behind the house and went straight to Emily's window. The thing Uncle Gordon said disturbed him most was that the footprints at the window didn't face toward the window. They faced back toward the caves where there was nothing but darkness. For the footprints not to have been washed away by the tide, someone had to have walked to Emily's bedroom window sometime after midnight and stood there staring out toward the caves during a storm. Strangely, he said they never really worried about it much at the time. Everyone knew everyone there. It just stands out in hindsight. The day she disappeared, they got a call from Nathan Jones, the boy with the records, telling them he just got a new one. Uncle Gordon said Nathan was an only child. He thought the records were how Nathan's parents kept him occupied and helped him make friends. So he was normally really excited when he got a record to share. This day he sounded flat, emotionless. Gordon had to ask if he was even speaking to Nathan. And the whole time, Uncle Gordon felt like someone else was listening in. He could hear a sound in the background that wasn't quite breathing. It was like someone saying yes very softly. Around this time, where my father and Uncle Gordon grew up, the phone lines were all what they called party lines. Each home's phone would have a different ring pattern, so they knew who should answer. But anyone could answer or listen in on anyone else's phone call. So having someone else on the line wasn't unheard of, just impolite. They went to Nathan's, but when they arrived, Nathan said he didn't call them, and he didn't even have a new record. My uncle and father decided to hang out with Nathan and listen to some old records anyway. But Emily was really disappointed and wanted to go home. So she left alone. He remembered thinking it was too bad she left, because they found her earplugs in Nathan's room. That was the last time they ever saw her, Uncle Gordon said. He was trying hard not to tear up. He said he remembered it like it was yesterday. Her small blue shoes, ribbons in her hair, and he said the shell bracelet they'd found during a trip to the city. It was her favorite accessory. I felt a horrible pit in my stomach when he said that. I don't think I'd ever mentioned the detail about the blue bracelet before. Not that Uncle Gordon would joke about something like this. I guess it could be a coincidence. A lot of people like shell bracelets, but I've never felt so unsettled in all my life. I told him about the man in the blue denim jacket. He told me to just drop it because it was a long time ago. That was all he had to say. There's a lot of what Uncle Gordon said that I find strange. Like how unconcerned he seemed that Nathan hadn't made the phone call. Or the earplugs. I'm visiting my father for Thanksgiving tomorrow. I'm going to bring 2 bottles of Maker's Mark bourbon. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I'll let you know if I find out anything more. Or if I don't. When I first unpacked the bottles of bourbon, Dad looked at me like I was setting a trap. In a way, I guess I was. I wonder if he knew what I was up to. I know at least he hadn't talked to Mom. They still don't get along. But Dad's a man's man and doesn't turn down a drink. I kept waiting for the opportunity to to start asking questions. But it never felt right. Turns out I didn't have to. Dad asked me if Uncle Gordon had talked. I told him he had, but that there was a lot that didn't make sense to me. Get used to it, was his answer. I was starting to get upset with all the secrecy. We'd always been a family of straight talkers. Or that's how we thought of ourselves. I didn't see why this was suddenly changing. So I asked him why he wasn't more alarmed by the strange sounds in my room when the same thing happened to his little sister, or why he didn't immediately think I was in danger when he found those recordings of me. Why didn't he do anything? He told me he did more than I'll ever know, that I was typical of my smartphone generation, and to go ahead and have another drink because it's Thanksgiving. I did, but I wasn't feeling very thankful. After sitting in silence for a while, which is pretty typical for us actually, he said, "Never liked that little weasel." I just waited for him to elaborate. Dad talks at his own pace. "Nathan Jones, I mean," he said. I hadn't expected him to say anything about Nathan. He seemed as peripheral to what happened as I could imagine. But Dad had a lot to say about him. Dad said Nathan wasn't really a bad kid. He was just strange and pale and weak. Most other kids didn't like him. His parents didn't seem to like him. Even the kids who did like him didn't really like him. The general opinion was that Nathan's parents were always gone, although it was hard to tell whether they were home or not. They kept to themselves. Rumors circulated that they were cousins who'd married. One thing that was certain was that they'd inherited money. Unlike everyone else, they didn't work at the cannery or on fishing boats. They just bought everything from the general store for Nathan and disappeared. Dad said today it would be called neglect, but people looked out for each other back then. One thing that always struck Dad as peculiar was how, when they wanted Nathan to do something other than listen to records, like go play kick the can, he'd say he was going to ask his parents. None of them had seen or heard his parents in the house, so they were surprised. But Nathan would go into this one room, close the door behind him, and they'd hear him talking to someone in there. He'd come out and tell them he had to stay put. This happened a few times, he said. Not that they invited Nathan Jones out all that much. Another thing he didn't like about Nathan was he'd just do strange things. Sometimes he seemed pretty normal. Then he'd change in an instant. This one time, they were listening to some new record he had. He turned it off and told them he learned a new song and dance. Dad wasn't interested, thinking it would be childish. But Emily and Gordon wanted to see. Nathan started walking backwards in a circle, trembling as if freezing, and making shrieking sounds. It was annoying Dad intensely, so he told Nathan to stop it. But Nathan kept doing it. Dad had never seen Nathan display any emotion other than excitement over his records. When he was doing this dance, he looked downright malevolent. Emily started crying, and Gordon looked pretty scared too. Dad never had patience for nonsense. He grabbed Nathan by the shoulders. He said he remembered how Nathan felt. His skin was cold and gelatinous, and he could feel his small shoulder bones as if they weren't properly covered. He shook Nathan until he stopped and was back to normal. Nathan started playing the record again, like nothing had happened. Dad said they left because Emily was too upset. It was after that, Dad said, that he went to get Nathan for something. He couldn't remember what, and Nathan wasn't home. That was unusual in itself. But Dad went inside to look for him, just in case. He couldn't find him. So he decided he'd just ask Nathan's parents where Nathan had gone. He opened the door to the room Nathan always entered. The room was kept very dark. They could never see anything when Nathan slipped in. Now he knew why. It wasn't a bedroom at all. It was just a closet. There was a cushion thrown on the floor, some bread crusts and pieces of paper. Dad said he'd seen enough. He closed the door and left, never went back to Nathan's again. Because when Nathan would go in that room, they wouldn't just hear Nathan talking. They'd hear someone talking to him. I'd already drunk more bourbon than I should have, but that still sent shivers through me. But I thought of something. I asked Dad if this happened after Emily disappeared. He said no, so I said, how was it he was at Nathan's the day Emily disappeared? Your Uncle Gordon doesn't always remember things correctly, he said. He gave me a stern look when he said this, like it was something I should keep in mind for the rest of my days. I know Dad's expressions very well. He said Gordon came up to him that day and said they had a call from Nathan to come over and listen to the new record. He'd heard the call come in, and that was nothing unusual. But he never went with them to Nathan's. He went to the general store to pick up a present for Laura Hughes, a girl he liked, and Gordon and Emily went to Nathan's by themselves. When he was at the general store, he remembered being surprised to see Nathan in there, just picking up some food with a large wad of cash. He'd never seen that much money in one place in his whole life, so he wasn't likely to forget it. He greeted Nathan, but Nathan just paid for his food and walked out with his groceries and his money. And Emily never came home from Nathan's that day. And that's all I know about it, he said. I told him Uncle Gordon said he was listening to music with him, and Nathan when Emily left on her own. Who was Gordon listening to music with then? Wasn't Nathan, was all Dad said. It was so eerily matter-of-fact. I took another shot of bourbon right there. I hoped it would stop me from shaking. When I looked at Dad, he was staring downward, with a sad resignation I'd never seen in him before. My dad could drink me under the table 10 times over. So after that last shot, he had to put me to bed on his couch. That was the end of our talk. Lying there on the couch, I suddenly remembered something from way back, when my family would go down to the beach. We'd all sit around the fire. The adults would drink and tell stories about growing up in that hamlet, and the kids would roast marshmallows and shiver listening to these stories. There were true stories and ghost stories all mixed together. These were the only occasions where I'd ever heard them talk about Emily before. After what my father said, I remembered a story Uncle Gordon told. He said he and Emily would go for these long walks along the shoreline together. My father used to go with them, since he was expected to watch them. But once he hit his teenage years, he got more interested in girls than babysitting. They decided to go back into the caves behind Hyman's general store. There are no marked paths or anything. They just picked a spot and went into the darkness. You can go back for quite a distance into just pure darkness. It's all protected coastline today. Normally they'd walk about 30 minutes or an hour. Dad would have them walk parallel to the shoreline. Without Dad, they just kept going deeper. They'd been walking into the caves for well over an hour. Or at least he thinks it was. Emily wanted to turn back by this time, but Gordon wanted to keep going deeper. She followed him because she was scared to go back alone. But she got upset and said she was going back on her own. He told her that's fine and not to get lost. Uncle Gordon said she wasn't gone 30 seconds when he felt her tugging at his arm. He got annoyed, thinking she was pestering him to go with her again. But when he looked, she was pointing at something behind him. He said very seriously that he'd never forget how wide and frightened her eyes were. He turned and saw a man standing deeper in the cave. It scared him too. The man didn't really look frightening. He was just a man. But there was no reason for anyone to be out so far in the caves. They shouldn't even be there. The man had his back to them, looking deeper into the darkness. He wasn't moving at all. They crouched down as quietly as they could to watch him. But he didn't do anything except stand there. Gordon said he didn't like it one bit. He felt there was something deeply wrong about what was happening. He took Emily by the hand, something he never did, and they walked away making as little noise as possible. He kept glancing over his shoulder as they walked. After a few minutes, he was satisfied they were well away from the man. He was long out of sight and probably hearing range. After a few more minutes of walking, Gordon heard a scraping sound. Emily squeezed his hand tighter, so he knew she heard it too. But they didn't say anything to each other. They were too scared. The scraping kept getting louder. Then he heard this scream, at the top of someone's lungs, like they'd been injured. Gordon looked back and saw the man they'd seen earlier running right at them at full speed through the cave, screaming the entire time. No words. Gordon said he and Emily were so terrified they couldn't even run. They backed up against the cave wall and crouched down. Gordon thought the man was going to kill them or hurt them, and he didn't know what to do about it. When the man caught up to them, he stopped short only a few feet away. He took a deep breath and shouted in their faces, "Get out!" They were too frightened to move. So the man kept shouting it at them. "Get out! Get out!" Finally, Gordon tugged at Emily, and they ran back the way they came. When they were almost out, they heard Dad calling for them somewhere back in the caves. They were about to run toward Dad, so he'd protect them. But then they saw him at the cave entrance and ran to him. He took them home, and that was that. He said they never told their mother, because they figured they were just trespassing. After Uncle Gordon finished his story, everyone was quiet for a long time. The story seemed to bother Dad more than anyone else. I remember being especially upset by it, just because it bothered Dad. Then Dad said he remembered that when he first came to get them, he couldn't find them. He figured they'd just gone home, but he couldn't find them at home either. He looked in the general store and down on the fishing wharf, but they weren't there either. So he went back to the caves. Just as he got there, he saw them running out of the caves screaming and crying. He asked them what was going on, thinking they'd just seen a high tide coming in or something, and they just kept sobbing. So he brought them home and questioned them to get the whole story. He said he never told Uncle Gordon at the time, but he saw them coming out of the caves as soon as he got there. He never did call out for them. I don't know why I suddenly remembered that story. It's just another strange thing that happened to my family. just an hour away from where Dad grew up, in the nearest larger town. There's a huge psychiatric hospital up on a hill, overlooking the whole town. The man in the caves could be just some patient who escaped, and they had the misfortune of startling him. Could be completely unrelated to everything else. So that gave me a lot to think about. I don't feel any more secure or confident after what Dad told me. If anything, I'm more confused and unsettled than ever. The last several days have been a strange journey, but I know there's no way I can let it go now. I'll try to find out more, and I'll continue sharing what I can. I managed to find out more about Nathan. I had to contact people I haven't spoken to in a long time or barely know at all. But eventually, I reached a few relatives who knew more than I ever expected to discover. Before I share what I learned about Nathan, though, I've been asked how I can keep such a level head while uncovering these disturbing incidents. I guess because it feels distant. I shake and shiver and feel dread when I'm hearing about or remembering these events. But it's still far in the past. Even my father finding the recordings in that house happened years ago. That's been changing lately. Small things have been happening that have been making me uneasy. For one, my mother has called me twice since Thanksgiving. I know this isn't overtly creepy, but we normally only talk once every 2 weeks. On top of that, she hasn't been herself. She's been trailing off, going silent for long periods, and sometimes it's like there's an echo when she speaks. I started wondering if someone's intercepting our conversations, like with a radio scanner or something. And she's been saying odd things. For instance, after being quiet for a while, she said, "It's lonely down here." I asked her what she meant by down here, since she didn't live any farther south than me. She just said in a tone so flat she could have been reading it, "You should come. It's wonderful down below." She changed the subject right after and seemed normal after that. My first instinct was to worry she was depressed or something. But I don't know. The last thing she said was if I hear anything strange about her not to believe it. I've also been receiving other phone calls. They started a little before Thanksgiving. The first call was an immediate hang-up. The next time just silence. Each time after that, I'd hear sounds. Cars passing by, footsteps, wind blowing. The kind of sounds you'd hear from an accidental call. But they were distorted, almost like someone was mimicking the sounds with their mouth. Last night it changed. There was a voice. The voice had a tinny, metallic quality, and that same echo as when Mom called. The combination made the voice sound inhuman and sinister. The words weren't threatening at all, but the way they were spoken made me feel like I was in danger for the first time since I started this investigation. The first time all he said was, "I'm on my way." I tried to say, "Wrong number back," but whoever it was had already hung up. I got a call a little later, and the same voice said, "I'll be there soon." This time he didn't hang up right away, so I said he had the wrong number. A moment after I said this, he hung up. On the third call he said, "I can see your house now," and again hung up immediately. I kept waiting for another call any minute, but after a few hours, I relaxed. I figure it really was a wrong number, and they realized their mistake. I mean, given the last 2 weeks, I have every reason to be a little jumpy. I get about halfway through an episode of Breaking Bad on the DVR before the phone rings again. I don't say anything immediately. Neither does he. After a minute or so, he says, "I'm right outside." As soon as he said that, I heard a noise at the front door. I don't know if I've ever been so terrified. I don't own any firearms, but I do have a fishing knife. So I grabbed it and went to the front door. I opened it ready for that hateful face from the construction site. Or worse, but my father was there, actually. He asked what the knife was for, and I asked him what brought him out to my house so late. It's a long enough drive, and Dad rarely visits anyway. He got pretty irritated about that. He opened his flip phone, yes, really, and showed me a text apparently from me. In the text, I asked him to come out immediately. It's an emergency. I told Dad I didn't send him that text. I didn't send him any text. I've never lied to Dad before, and that carries weight. He believed me. To be honest, though, I was glad he was there at just that moment. We had a drink together, and then he said he was going to head back home. I asked him a few questions about Nathan before he left. He didn't much want to talk about it, but I'll add what he told me into the account of what I learned. After Emily disappeared, Dad and Gordon were expressly forbidden to have anything to do with Nathan. For Dad, that suited him just fine. Dad nevertheless told his mother that Nathan couldn't have been responsible, since he'd just seen him at Hyman's general store. His mother said there had always been something wrong with that boy, and she felt if Emily hadn't gone to his home that day, she'd still be alive. While Dad and Gordon hoped she was still alive, their mother never really believed she was. She said she saw a seagull fly into the house the day after Emily disappeared, but when she chased after it, she couldn't find it anywhere. Dad said it was just grief, and these kinds of supernatural beliefs were common then. I tend to agree. Nathan made no efforts to reach out to Dad, or Gordon either. He started keeping to himself after Emily disappeared. They'd sometimes see him alone at Hyman's, buying lots of food, way more than one boy should need. They never spoke. Suspicions about Nathan and concerns about his missing parents grew. The police had looked around Nathan's house a little, since it's where Emily was last seen, and found nothing. But now they were asked to search the house more thoroughly. They wouldn't say what was wrong or what they found in there. The rumor was Nathan's parents hadn't been there in a long time, and that the police had come out of the house pale and shaken. Small towns always have rumors. Hard to say if they're true or false. Nathan was placed with some distant relatives in the larger town, an hour away. They said he was strange, and they didn't like him. He was always up and walking around at night. Sometimes he'd stop over the vents in the floor and just stare into them. After he'd been there for a bit, they started to hear him talking to himself in the middle of the night. They'd come up to him to see what he was doing, and there was no one else around. They started watching him. They noticed he only did this when he was standing over the air vents. They even found him crouching down over one once. This girl, a third cousin of his, said it still gave her the creeps. Because she knows, she heard someone answering him one time. Those vents couldn't have been more than 1.5 feet wide, she said, but she heard a man's voice coming up with the warm air. She couldn't make out what was being said, but she heard laughter that made her run and hide under her covers. She said she thinks this part may have been a dream, but she always swore she saw a finger poking up from the vent, too. She told her parents, but they said to stop making up stories and that he'd been through a lot. Her sister said sometimes Nathan would walk out to the cliffs and just stand there, staring into the ocean. They asked him why he did that. He said he was waiting to be taken. He went farther toward the edge when she tried to talk to him more. One time, the same girl said she heard him talking into the air vents like usual. She was tired and it was annoying her, so she went to get her parents and have him sent to bed. On her way, she noticed Nathan was still sound asleep in his room. The talking had to be coming up from the vent, all on its own. They said Nathan would sometimes steal food from the house and take it out to the cliffs. When he was caught, he said he had a hideout, but they never saw it if it existed. They'd sometimes wake up and find him staring at them in the middle of the night. They had to start locking their doors. They would complain to their parents to send him away all the time. But they were careful not to do it when Nathan was around because, despite everything, they didn't want to be mean. One time he asked them why they wanted him sent away. They couldn't figure out how he'd heard. He was living with them for nearly 6 months when something happened that changed him. They didn't know what it was, but he stopped all of the weird behavior all at once. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He hardly ate. Then one day he just ran away. He's been a missing person ever since. His parents never turned up to look for him. There was no evidence either way, so the case went nowhere. They also said years later, when his house burned down, pictures of the fire appeared in the local newspaper. People talked about it for weeks because in the picture, the smoke looked just like a massive face. Eyes and everything. They tried to find the newspaper in their closets, but neither of them could find it. I include that part not because I believe in a face that manifests itself in smoke patterns. I think it's interesting that his cousins thought he was so creepy that a monster would appear in the smoke rising from his burning house. That's what I know about Nathan. He hasn't been seen or heard from since, from all I can find out. Same for his parents, where his home was just a lush field of wild roses. One last thing. After Dad left last night, I noticed my mailbox lid was up. I knew I'd closed it earlier when I checked the mail. So I looked inside. I found an envelope with a Polaroid photo inside. An old one, too. It was of me, Mom, and Dad all at the beach together. This beach is actually the same place where Dad grew up. The houses are mostly gone. Hyman's General Store is still there as a museum. I had to be only 4 or 5 in the picture. I don't even remember Mom going to the beach with us. I wondered if Dad found it and stuck it in my mailbox. But Dad wouldn't bother to bring it to me if he had found it. He wouldn't see the value in it. I kept looking at it, wondering what it was doing there. It took me a surprisingly long time to see it. In the background, by the entrance to the caves, there was a man crouched down and watching us. He was barely visible. I couldn't make out his face or any expression in his eyes. I just had a vague but definite feeling he meant to do us harm. I don't want to be too alarmist. The strange things happening to me may all have innocent explanations, and I'm just on edge. And I still want to get to the bottom of things. My investigations hit a bit of a dead end, but I'll keep you all posted. After my last update, I did something I haven't done since Mom left. I broke down. I called Mom up and told her everything that's been going on and how it's been affecting me. I told her I couldn't take it anymore. I have a regular life I should be leading. I have a job and friends, but I'm trapped in this maze of lies and secrets. Yes, I can get very dramatic. She said she would book a flight immediately. Then we'd get with my father and talk things over, all three of us. I told her she didn't have to do that. I know she's busy. Plus, she and Dad still don't get along. She told me she still loves Dad and always has. They just had too many differences. He couldn't accept her for who she was. But she always thought it was their destiny to be together. Her happiness in life was the hope that we'd all be a family, like we should be. I don't know if she was just saying this to make me feel better. It did make me feel better. It also felt weird hearing Mom talk like this. She was never the most emotional person. I thought that's why she was a good match for Dad, because you have to be thick-skinned to be around him. She said she'd see me soon to put an end to this. And she said, "I hope your father makes the right choice." I wondered what she was referring to, but she was gone before I could ask. I called up Dad right away to let him know, because her flight couldn't take longer than 4 or 5 hours. She'd be arriving in time for dinner. As I expected, this wasn't welcome news to him, but not for the reasons I expected. Turns out he's been reconnecting with Laura Hughes. I said that seems like a strange coincidence, but not at all. Telling the story reminded him of her. Grace and Poy's son is how he described her. She'd sent him a message a while back telling him she'd moved back into town. He'd just been too busy to write her back, and then he forgot. As it happened, they'd made dinner plans that evening. He'd be going to her place. Dad hadn't really bothered much with relationships after he and Mom divorced. He'd tried. Every so often, he'd meet a woman he really liked and who seemed to like him well enough to introduce her to me. Something would always happen that scared them away. He used to joke that he was cursed. I think he probably internalized that. It was pretty much never his fault, though. Vivian accused him of calling her in the middle of the night and telling her weird things. I overheard the argument. I remember one of the things was, "You'd be so much better without bones," and that he kept calling her jellyfish. I know Dad wouldn't do that. He would never think of something so bizarre in a million years. But she believed it was him. Catherine said she started to notice things in her house would move while she was asleep. And it only started when she began seeing Dad. Her vinyl collection in particular. She also said one night she woke up because she heard Dad get up and go to the kitchen. She looked out into the kitchen and saw him staring into the refrigerator. She started drifting back to sleep again when she heard more noise. The refrigerator door was still open, but she couldn't see him anymore. This made her angry, so she shouted for him to keep it down and close the fridge door. That's when Dad said, "What the hell's going on?" He was still lying in bed right beside her. She wouldn't have anything to do with him after that. Jenna was my favorite of all Dad's girlfriends. She was adventurous. She loved hiking, and she traveled extensively, so I'd hear about all different countries from her. She also talked about strange things happening while with Dad, like hearing him talk to her when he wasn't in the house. But she didn't let it get to her. They were together for a while. One night she had an accident while driving out to a remote area that leads to a tiny mining town nearby. She died a day later in the hospital from internal bleeding. It didn't seem important at the time, but now I remember Dad wondering why she'd been driving out that way anyway, and her brother yelling at Dad that he'd told Jenna to meet him out there. There were other incidents. I probably don't know about them all, but this one, back when I got Dad set up on email in like 2000 or so, he started talking to this woman online. He said she contacted him out of the blue. He was a two-finger typist, so I imagine it took a while to compose messages. After he got interested enough to ask for pictures, she sent him a zip file full of them. All pictures of himself with a black silhouette, crudely edited into the images. I traced the account as best I could, and it led me to an address. The general store out in what's now the state park. He just wanted to drop it, and we did. Anyway, with so much bad luck in love, I guess I was happy for him. He shouldn't be alone forever. It was just awful timing. I wondered if he was even putting her in danger by dating her. But I couldn't tell him that. I told him I'd deal with Mom, and he could have his date. While I waited around for Mom to call and let me know she'd arrived, I decided to search my house for holes, nests, and such. I don't think that's paranoia at this point. But there were no holes under the bed. No nests in the closet. The plumbing seemed secure. The vents blew air smoothly. Then I noticed the refrigerator didn't look straight. I actually thought I was being ridiculous, so I tried to distract myself. I ended up pulling it out anyway. I never believed anything would be there. But there it was, a little hole just big enough for a child to squeeze into. I got a flashlight and my fishing knife. I was so sure someone's hand would grab me the moment I put my head in. No one was in there, though. The space was only wide enough for a very slim man to stand very stiffly. And I didn't see any holes in the wall where he could look into the next room, my bedroom. He would have just been standing there, staring into the darkness behind my refrigerator. What would be the point? I kept wondering. Then I saw the doll. It was made of driftwood and seaweed and had my face on it. Just looking at it made me feel uncomfortable. I refused to touch it. Call me superstitious, but it felt unnatural. I'd only made that discovery when I saw another doll behind it, bigger and seeming to watch the smaller doll. Its face was a picture of someone who just looked evil. I don't know what evil should really look like. I just know this face made me feel like evil was present. I've learned my lesson. I immediately called the police and requested Detective Porter. When he got on the line, before I had a chance to speak, he asked me if I was okay and if I was alone. I answered yes to both questions, as far as I know, but I wanted to know why. He said he'd been about to call me. He said they'd just gotten word from the police department in my mother's town. He hesitated. I figured they'd found someone had broken into her house or left a creepy letter. But what he had to say was a lot worse than that. They'd found what they believed to be her body deep in a secluded coastal area. It was so remote that it was pure chance a hiker found her. I assured him that whoever they found was not my mother. I had just spoken to her. She was on her way. The line went silent. I insisted that I be allowed to make an identification so they could drop this nonsense. Porter said the body was past identifying. She'd been dead for over a year. Dental records confirmed it was her. The only identifiable thing was her blue shell bracelet. I hung up on him. I had no idea how to process this information. If someone tells you the sky is brown and salt is sweet, do you accept it immediately? I had been speaking to my mom every 2 weeks for the last several years, and never noticed a change in her behavior or personality until the last few days. If she was dead, who was I speaking to all this time? It had to be her. I know my own mother's voice, her mannerisms. She knew everything my mom should know. So I started to wonder about this Detective Porter character. Maybe he wasn't trustworthy. He seemed to have a strange influence over my father, calling him Richard like that. So I called up the police department in Mom's town. When I identified myself, I was immediately transferred to a detective. He told me the trace on the phone had come back. All calls from that phone were coming from my own town. Moreover, the phone is even registered to a local address. I felt a hollowness inside. I still feel it. It's only gotten worse. I didn't even have to ask about Detective Porter anymore. I asked anyway, and it was confirmed. But I already knew. It couldn't have been my mother I've been talking to. She was dead. I needed to let Dad know right away. I tried calling him. It went straight to voicemail. I hoped this meant he was already with Laura and was safe. I decided to look up Laura Hughes so I could call her and reach him that way. I found her number with an online phone lookup. It was a landline. I called it just in case. Maybe someone in her household knew her cell number. A young-sounding woman answered the phone. She sounded a little overexcited to get a call, like she'd been waiting. I introduced myself and explained that I really needed to get through to Laura, and it was an emergency. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked. I almost lost my temper, but she explained first. "My mother has been missing for a week, sir. I called Detective Porter back. I told him he had to get to Dad's right away because he was in trouble. In as succinct a manner as possible, I told him what I knew. I was hyperventilating. I don't know how he understood half of it. I'm so glad he listened and believed me, though. I couldn't stand just waiting at home. I got in my car and rushed to Dad's. The lights were on when I arrived. That was a good sign, I thought. The front door was unlocked. When I walked in, I heard music. I recognized the song, actually. It was Patsy Cline's Crazy. I'd never heard Dad listen to anything but classic rock. But maybe he was trying to impress the woman. Maybe she came to his place instead. I called out for him, but he didn't answer. Dad's always had such amazing hearing. Even at his age, he could hear far better than me. And he was a great dad. I haven't always made him sound great, but he's my hero, you know. I knew something was wrong when he didn't answer. I searched everywhere downstairs. The damn song kept playing on a loop. It wasn't even coming from Dad's stereo. I went upstairs next. The song started over just as I got to the top. When I got to Dad's bedroom, I saw where the music was coming from. A record player was on his bed. I stared at it, not really comprehending why I was so afraid to go near it. I wasn't thinking clearly. It took me too long to realize it. But the song couldn't be on loop. Someone had to be restarting it by hand. I backed into a corner involuntarily. I felt control of my bladder near slipping. I even screamed when I heard something downstairs. But I heard them say, "Police," and I almost cried with relief. That's when I noticed it, something looking at me from under Dad's bed. The whole time he was watching me. All I saw was an eye at first, looking at me through a hole in Dad's box spring. I started to panic again. The officers, one was Detective Porter, drew their guns. I pointed to the box spring as a hand reached out and set the needle back to the beginning of the song. They demanded the man get out. He started to make awful sounds. I'd never heard anything like it. Inhuman wails. And one intelligible thing in all the screams: "Sleep in me." Cold chills swept over me like only once before. They finally dragged him out. It was the man I'd seen at the construction site. The weirdo that shouted at me. The same one that gave me chills before. He was wearing a dress and a wig, with some smeared makeup and a bloodied nose. But it was the same man. I could barely stand to look at the creature. But he wouldn't stop staring at me. I asked where Dad was, and he said in my mother's voice, "Giving birth to you was the happiest day of my life." I felt nauseated. Then in a perfectly normal voice, in the most reasonable and yet most sinister tone I'll ever hear, he said, "He made me so lonely. But you don't know. And I'll never say another word as long as I live." They took him away. So quickly it felt like a dream. Detective Porter took me with him. I was allowed to go home and rest. Rest only came when I passed out. And while I slept, they found Dad. The address my mom's cell phone was registered to was the same house where Dad found the recordings. Laura must have called him out there. He'd been stabbed in the throat multiple times. He's the toughest man alive, so he was still breathing when police found him. But it was too much. He didn't make it. That's really all I can say now. This was almost impossible to write. I think I must still be in shock to have written it at all. There's a little more I need to say, but it's going to have to wait a few days. I really wanted to just drop this, curl up in a ball and forget everything. But I have to put all the pieces together. What I have of them anyway. I owe it to my mom, Dad, and myself, and to all of you for standing with me during this nightmare. After arresting that thing in my dad's house, police searched the old house, my dad's. They found material that's helped to shed some light on the events I described in the previous updates. Scraps of paper, a journal of sorts, photographs, combined with additional information from others who grew up with Dad. What I want to do here is not give you each little piece of information. We've all had enough mystery. I want to give you the whole story. And by the whole story, I mean how I think it all fits together. It may not be completely accurate, but I wouldn't be sharing it if I didn't think it was close. So let's start at the beginning. A schizophrenic patient was released from the psychiatric hospital, really an asylum. He wandered the coastline until he had some kind of episode down there. He came out in the little town of Black Rock Cove. Husky Malo, since I have no other name for him. He went around convincing children to bring him food, like the peanut butter and honey sandwiches. When he met Nathan, he even got a place to stay. Husky and Nathan lurked around together. He got sandwiches. Nathan was interested in other things. In particular, the family that lived a few houses down. They were the only kids around that would hang out with him. He particularly liked Dad. Dad was handsome, tall, and athletic. So he got Husky to ask Emily for more than just sandwiches. He wanted to listen to Dad and Gordon sleeping. When Nathan's parents found he'd allowed a vagrant to squat in their home, though, they got angry. They never beat Nathan. They just yelled at him. Then they tried to kick Husky out. So Husky and Nathan killed his parents. Police first found the bloodstains in the house, and then the bodies beneath it. With his parents' recorder, Nathan started making audio recordings of Dad, Gordon, and Emily while they slept. Emily noticed the strange sounds. She was just a lighter sleeper, apparently. This didn't stop Nathan. He kept making recordings for over a year. Finally, one night, Emily caught him. She told him she'd tell her mom, and that he was going to be in big trouble. The next day, Husky called them over to listen to records. I would guess at Nathan's request, but who knows? When Nathan was coming back from buying food, he saw Emily walking away from the house. He didn't want her to tell on him for making the recordings, so he grabbed her and dragged her to the caves. He didn't kill her right away. In all the photos they found hidden in that house, there was one faded picture of a teenage girl. It was Emily. I'm sure of it. In the photo, she was in some sort of a cave shelter. She wasn't restrained, but she looked so miserable. The whole place seemed tinged with despair. It was an awful-looking place. She was 12 when she disappeared, so she was kept somewhere after her kidnapping, somewhere no one ever thought to look for her. Only Nathan and Husky knew where she was, probably where Husky hid while police looked for him. After Nathan thought it was safe for Husky to come out, my father was involved in finding him and was implicated in the man's death. That much was confirmed for me by Detective Porter. Nathan was already at his cousin's home by this time. He'd been taken as soon as his parents were found. So wherever Emily was being kept, she was left alone once Husky died. While he was at his cousin's, I think Nathan had a psychotic break. Husky really was his whole world. He'd drawn Nathan into his delusions. He talked to what he thought was Husky in the vents and near the cliffs, but I don't think anyone was actually there. No fingers poked out of the vent. Because if it wasn't all in Nathan's imagination, who was that? After some time with his cousins who didn't even like him, he ran away. He probably had money stashed somewhere. Or maybe he just became a drifter. My father, on the other hand, grew up and moved on. He met a beautiful dancer and married her. That's where I come in. We were a reasonably happy family, from what I understand, until something happened that made Mom and Dad resent each other. They divorced. Dad fought hard for custody, and Mom went back east where she'd originally come from. Not long after Mom was out of the picture, I started hearing the strange ocean sounds. When I told Dad and Uncle Gordon, it terrified them. The possibility that I could end up disappearing like Emily is just about the only thing that could terrify my father. What I never knew is that after I told them about the sounds, they went out to the state park together while I stayed with Uncle Gordon's wife. They spent all day looking for the place they'd buried Husky, but they found it. And they dug him up to make sure he was really dead. That's why Dad was so insistent that the sounds were just in my head or the building's pipes. Because the man they believed was behind Emily's abduction was dead and buried. And they had to believe it was him behind it, because if they didn't, they'd murdered an innocent man. Since this man probably murdered Nathan's parents, he wasn't that innocent. But they didn't know that. Years later, when Dad found the recordings of me in that house, he knew he'd been wrong. Whoever it was, he figured, was the same person recording Emily. They'd killed the wrong person, and I was in danger. He went out looking for anyone suspicious. Roughed up a few guys, but nothing came of it. What I think happened is that Nathan was still obsessed with Dad. He did something to sabotage Mom and Dad's relationship. Then when Mom was out of the picture, he inserted himself into the family in the only way he knew how, by sneaking recordings of me while I slept. I believe Nathan must have had our phones and home bugged. He'd adapted to being a shadow in our lives. Maybe he imagined he was something more. After a while, this wasn't enough to satisfy him anymore. He murdered my mother and pretended to be her for a year. I think this gave him what he really wanted, to be Dad's wife and my mother. His obsession with my father wasn't just admiration. He was in love with him. He resented my mom, hated her even, for taking what he believed was his. He wasn't recording me because he wanted to scare me or abduct me. He thought he was being motherly. He drew pictures of himself nursing me and Dad smiling behind. And whenever Dad found a new woman he was interested in, Nathan had to take her out of the picture, like a jealous spouse. He believed his delusion sometimes. When I let Mom know that I was investigating these events, I think it made him feel more significant in our lives. I think it also threatened him. Becoming aware of him was ruining his illusion that he wasn't really my mom. That's when he started acting out. When he talked to me as Mom, telling me Dad had to make a choice. I think he expected Dad to see him as Mom and fall in love. Laura Hughes's body was found. He killed her just to seduce my father into meeting him. The choice was between Laura or Mom. Because Dad chose Laura, he killed him. He ran back to Dad's house and into the box spring, where he'd been living for a few weeks. The music, the makeup, and dress were all supposed to be for Dad's reunion with Mom, if he'd chosen her. I wish I hadn't encouraged Dad to go on that date. If I hadn't, he might still be alive. The whole thing is so senseless. Insanity, obsession, and loneliness, all unprovoked by us. I hate him and I want him to suffer, but then I don't even know why. He really was just insane. I wrote all of this feeling quite certain last night. It was therapeutic, at least. I needed to organize it all somehow. This morning, I got news that just undermines everything. You all remember the Etch-a-Sketch, right? Like that, while everything I said is, in a way, still true, there's one very important part that's wrong. A part that makes a lot of it make no sense at all. Detective Porter told me they weren't able to identify the man they caught at Dad's home. However, they could positively state who he wasn't. This man was not Nathan Jones. Nathan is a resident at a group home over 300 miles away, where he's been for the past 4 years. He's practically a shut-in, Porter says. He never goes anywhere. Ever. The man they arrested has no identification. His prints aren't in the system. No dental records, nothing. And he's so far stuck to his promise. He hasn't spoken since that night. Other prisoners avoid him like they're afraid. They won't say why, just that there's something wrong. And they're right. The last thing I want to leave you all with is a strange story I heard from an old friend of Dad's. Dad's friend is a ranger at the state park, where Dad's town used to be. He said over the years, he's heard odd stories about things deep in the caves. But one from not too long ago stands out, and he felt compelled to tell it to me. I have no idea why, and I can't say it connects to anything else. It has nothing to do with my family or Nathan. It just feels like it fits somehow. A couple from out of town was in the area to do some hiking. The park connects to the Appalachian Trail, so lots of experienced hikers come through. They decided to do a little off-trail exploring. As I mentioned before, there are miles of unmapped caves back there, so they had plenty of room for exploration. After hours in the caves, they realized their compass wasn't working at all. Their phones had no signal, of course. They were lost. That deep in, the caves were quite constricted, and the sun was starting to set. They were experienced enough to have adequate water, rations, and camping gear, so they didn't panic. But they kept walking, hoping to make it to an exit or ranger station. When it got too dark to see, they started to set up camp. That's when the woman tells her boyfriend she can see a light. He looks and sees it too. It looks like artificial light. They weren't sure if they were still deep in the caves or not, but it felt eerie. They walked carefully toward it, using an emergency flashlight. They couldn't hear any traffic as they got near, and saw no other lights. But the light seemed to be coming from a real house. A little weathered, but no shack or ruin. There was a clearing around the house, large enough for two people to walk side by side. The guy insisted they examine the perimeter first. His girlfriend thought he was being ridiculous, but he told her he had a bad feeling about the place. She thought the caves at night were just making him jumpy. Still, she went along. Shingled roof, wood-sided walls, curtained windows, and even a front porch. What they couldn't find was a road, or even a path or trail. Nothing but rocky walls. The walls surrounded the whole circumference, as densely as any part of the caves. That didn't sit right at all. But they needed help. They knocked on the only door. An older man answered the door pretty quickly. He looked well-groomed, dressed in a nice shirt and cardigan. "Evening, strangers," he says, like it was perfectly normal. The boyfriend apologized for bothering him and explained how they'd been wandering the caves all day, and his house was the first they found. The man was understanding. He invited them inside and seated them in his living room. It was nicely decorated and warm inside. They didn't even notice her at first, but there was a woman seated in the corner of the room. She didn't say anything, but nodded politely to them when noticed. The guy and girl exchanged glances. They felt strangely uncomfortable. The man returned to the living room with a tray of tea. He set it in front of them, then sat across from them. They poured themselves each a cup. The man watched them very carefully. They didn't like the way he scrutinized them. The fireplace crackled and popped ominously. It seemed to them behind him. The tension of the silence kept mounting, so the guy decided to say something. He noted that he hadn't seen any roads or paths around the house. Nope, the man agreed. So he asked how the man comes and goes. To this, he says he stays put. How about supplies? The man leans back in his chair and looks at the guy suspiciously. You're awfully curious, he says. They heard a strange, wet scraping noise somewhere else inside the house right then. The man doesn't react, so they pretend to ignore it. But they were both starting to get nervous being in the place. The guy asked the man how far from the nearest cave exit they were. He was calculating in his head if they had enough battery to see them to it in the dark. The man answered that they were very far from any exit on all sides. The girl said it was weird to her that the place was so hidden, because unless someone knew it was there or stumbled on it by pure chance, no one would ever find it. There couldn't be an address, after all, if there was no path. The man asked which they were, and then said, "How do I know you didn't come here to kill me?" They didn't know what to say to that. They figured it was a joke and laughed uncomfortably. But he just smirked at them. He excused himself then and vanished around the corner into a dark hallway. While they were alone, they looked around the room. There was a painting hanging over the fireplace that kept catching the guy's attention. He didn't know why. He hated art. It was a scene of a couple walking through a cave passage. There were thick stalactites around. Now that he looked at the painting more closely, he saw something that he swore wasn't there before. Staring out from behind one of the rock formations was a man's face, watching the couple with a look of pure hate. He was really unsettled, but he didn't want his girlfriend to see it. They drank more of the tea because it was warm. They'd taken a few gulps when they noticed the girl in the corner again. They only noticed her this time because she was shaking her head, almost imperceptibly. But she kept doing it, shaking her head and looking at the teacups. She became perfectly still again when the man returned. The guy tried to explain to the man that they must be going. He didn't feel well, and there had been way too many red flags to keep ignoring. But the words that came out of his mouth were slurred and ineffectual, and he passed out. When he woke up, he had an awful headache. He shook his girlfriend awake as well. They realized they'd slept for some time. The guy suspected they'd been drugged, but couldn't be certain. The man was nowhere to be seen. Neither was the woman, and their gear was missing. They wanted to leave right away, but needed their supplies. They had no idea how far from any cave exits they were, so they went searching the rooms of the house. There were 3 doors down the hall. All led to bedrooms. The first 2 were empty. So was the last, but it had their gear on the middle of a child's bed. They grabbed their stuff and prepared to leave. But the guy saw a curtain covering an opening at the very end of the hall, and he had to know. He pulled it open. It was just a closet. The man and woman must have left the house, he thought. Then he noticed his girlfriend's face. She was terrified of something, so much she was backing away and tugging at him. He looked back in the closet. It was the man, crouched down naked in the bottom of the closet, looking up at them with a smile that crossed most of his face. But his eyes fixed them with the most unmistakably intense rage. He started crawling out of the closet toward them on all 4s, and making sounds like they'd never heard any living thing make before. They ran out of the house and straight into the caves. They moved as fast as possible, cutting themselves and stumbling several times. Something deep in their guts kept telling them that man was right behind them, like the man in the rocks in that horrible painting. And he was going to kill them. They finally came out of the caves onto a marked trail, and from there, slowly followed it to a ranger station and found their way back to town. They told the park rangers about it and were advised to keep the story to themselves. Later, they looked the area up on satellite maps. It took them a while, but they spotted a strange white dot deep in the unmapped section. It was even deeper in than they'd thought. As they zoomed in, the guy saw something weird in front of the white spot. He enhanced the image as best he could. Still a little blurry, but the couple knew what it was. The man was standing in front of the house and looking straight up, like he knew they were watching. They sent the image to the rangers as proof. I know there are still so many questions. What really happened to Emily? Was Nathan dealing with someone else? How'd he know so much about Mom? Who was that guy who got arrested? Why was the blue bracelet on my mom's body? I just don't know, so for now, that'll just have to be the end. I'll rewrite this story in English for an American audience, maintaining the suspense and first-person narrative while changing some details and setting. When I was 23, I faced a turning point that would change everything. A job offer in Seattle forced me to leave my small hometown in Missouri. Today, 5 years later, I'm still with the same tech company, though I've managed to transfer back to our regional office near home. Back then, though, my priority was finding somewhere to live without draining my bank account. I put out feelers everywhere, posting on Craigslist, Facebook, even the subreddit for my new neighborhood. After a week of dead ends, a message popped up from someone named Rob. He had a room available in his house, and I needed to check every option. My parents weren't thrilled when I mentioned sharing a place with a male stranger, but desperate times called for practical measures. Rob seemed decent in our video calls, showed me around the house virtually, explained that he owned the property outright. It was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow, just 15 minutes from the tech park where I'd be working. The rent was fair at $750 a month, utilities included. During our virtual tour, Rob explained his rules. No smoking indoors, shared cleaning duties, overnight guests needed a heads up. Nothing unreasonable. He mentioned his previous roommate, a college buddy who just moved out to get married. Perfect timing for me. I arrived the following Tuesday with my Honda Civic packed to the brim. Rob waited on the porch, a thin guy around my height of 5'6". He helped carry my heaviest boxes, showing me to the back bedroom. The room came furnished with a double bed, dresser, and small desk. I immediately stripped the bed and replaced everything with my own linens. The first few days passed without incident. Rob kept to himself, working from home as a freelance graphic designer. On Sunday, he offered to show me around the city. I wasn't particularly interested, but agreed to avoid tension early on. We drove around for 2 hours, and he pointed out shopping areas, good restaurants, hiking trails. Around noon, he suggested lunch at a sports bar downtown. I wasn't hungry, but he persisted. The way he leaned in during conversation maintained intense eye contact. It felt like a date. When he suggested drinks afterward, I politely declined, reminding him I had work the next day. "Come on, just a couple beers," he pushed. "You're too uptight." I maintained my refusal, and his demeanor shifted instantly. The friendly tour guide disappeared, replaced by silent resentment that lingered during our drive home. My new job kept me busy, and I spent most evenings at the office or in my room. A week into living there, I noticed something odd. My laundry basket seemed disturbed, items rearranged. When I moved clothes to the washing machine, I realized a pair of underwear was missing. I searched everywhere, under the bed, in drawers, even the shared bathroom. Nothing. The possibility that Rob had taken it made my skin crawl. Rather than confront him directly, I bought a locking doorknob at Home Depot that weekend. I waited until he left for his weekly poker game to install it, figuring I'd explain later if asked. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since moving in. Around 2 in the morning, aggressive pounding jolted me awake. "Jennifer, open the door," Rob's voice angry and demanding. I pretended to be asleep, my heart racing as the door handle jiggled unsuccessfully. After what felt like hours, his footsteps retreated. The next morning, my phone buzzed with multiple texts. "We need to talk. Be home after work. Don't ignore me." I responded asking if this was about the door lock. "Yes. Remove it today." I worked late that evening, dreading our conversation. When I finally got home, Rob was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed. "You can't just change locks without permission," he said. "It's in your lease agreement." I explained my reasoning carefully. As a woman living with a male stranger, I need to feel secure in my private space. His expression darkened. "You think I'd do something. Is that it?" "I never said that. It's just about feeling comfortable." He ran a hand through his hair, his tone shifting. "Look, I get it. But those are my rules. Remove it by tomorrow or find somewhere else to live." I complied, hating myself for it. But how had he even known about the lock? Unless, 2 days later, while Rob was at the grocery store, someone knocked on the door. A woman around my age stood there, looking nervous. "Do you live here with Rob?" When I nodded, she continued, "You need to leave." Soon as possible, my stomach dropped. Why? Rob's got at least 4 restraining orders from different women. He's dangerous. Obsessive. I dated him last year, and it took me months to get away. She explained she'd seen the moving truck the previous week, wasn't surprised he'd chosen a female roommate. She'd been watching for him to leave, so she could warn me. I thanked her, my hands shaking. She gave me her number, offering help if needed. Even though I'd paid through the month, I started planning my exit immediately. I found a studio apartment in Bellevue, available for immediate move-in. More expensive, but worth the peace of mind. I began discreetly moving items to my car, texting Rob that a family emergency required me to leave town. He appeared at my bedroom door that evening. "Someone came by earlier, didn't they?" "A woman?" "No," I lied, avoiding eye contact. "You're lying." "I can always tell." He moved closer. "Whatever story she told you, it's not true. I'm the victim here." I stuck to my script about family issues. He finally relented, promising to return my rent money after the bank the next day. Around midnight, I woke to find Rob sitting at the foot of my bed. My scream pierced the darkness. He clamped a hand over my mouth. "SHHH. Why would I hurt you?" Terror paralyzed me as he continued. "I knew someone poisoned you against me. Don't believe their lies." His hand moved to my leg, and I bolted. I ran outside in my pajamas, dialing 911 while hiding behind the neighbor's SUV. When police arrived, they took statements from both of us. Rob maintained I'd imagined everything, that he'd never entered my room. With officers present, I retrieved my belongings and demanded my rent refund. Rob handed over $750 in cash, maintaining a concerned citizen act. One officer pulled me aside. "He's been on our radar. 3 separate incidents with female tenants. Same pattern each time." I left immediately, checking into the Hyatt downtown. The next day, I moved into my studio apartment. The landlord, a kind older woman named Mrs. Chen, understood my urgency. I've kept that promise to myself ever since. No male roommates unless they're my partner. Honestly, I prefer living alone entirely. Some lessons cost more than rent money, but they're worth every penny. I was alone in the house on a crisp autumn night in suburban Ohio. My parents and my sister had driven up to Cleveland to visit my grandmother in the hospital, leaving me to hold down the fort. I was 17 and had assured them I'd be perfectly fine on my own for the night. I was a total gaming fanatic back then, completely obsessed with Call of Duty and World of Warcraft. This was in 2019, just a few months before everything shut down due to the pandemic. I was holed up in my second-floor room, headset on, totally immersed in an online match with my clan members when the doorbell rang. The sound jolted me out of my concentration. I paused the game, annoyed at the interruption. Who would be at the door at 9:30 at night? I jogged down the stairs, taking 2 at a time, hoping I could get back to my match quickly. "Who is it?" I called out as I reached the front door. A soft voice answered, barely audible through the thick wooden door. "Please, I need help." I opened the main door but kept the screen door locked. Standing on our porch was an elderly woman, maybe in her 70s, with perfectly styled silver hair and wearing a navy blue cardigan. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she had the kindest smile I'd ever seen. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound polite but wary. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my car broke down just around the corner. My cell phone battery is dead, and I need to call my grandson to come pick me up. Could I possibly use your phone for just a moment? From the time I could walk, my parents had drilled into me the golden rule. Never let strangers into the house, no matter what. Even sweet-looking old ladies with car trouble." "I'm really sorry," I said, feeling awkward but determined. "My parents aren't home, and they don't allow me to let anyone inside." The smile stayed on her face, but something shifted in her eyes. "Oh, I understand completely. Perhaps I could just stand here by the door while you bring the phone to me." I was about to close the door and suggest she walk the few blocks to the 24-hour pharmacy where there was a payphone near the entrance. There's a pharmacy on 5th Street that's open all night. They have a phone you can use. The look on her face was briefly unsettling, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but she just smiled wider and said, "Thank you so much, dear." I closed the door quickly and returned to my room, throwing myself back into the game. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was more insistent, 3 quick rings. Something about the situation felt off. I muted my game and crept to the window to peek out through the blinds. From my angle, I couldn't see the porch clearly, just the edge of the front yard. The doorbell kept ringing, now in rapid succession. Getting up from my desk, I decided to move downstairs and stay quiet until whoever it was left. I turned off all the lights in my room first, not wanting to draw attention to that side of the house. As I left my room, that's when I heard it. A strange metallic tapping sound at my bedroom window. My heart jumped into my throat. The window was on the 2nd floor. There shouldn't be anyone up there. I froze, listening carefully. The tapping came in a pattern: tap tap, tap tap tap, tap tap. Creeping back to my room, I lifted the edge of the blind just enough to peek out. My window looked out over the side yard, where a large oak tree stood. Someone could conceivably climb it to reach the window, but who would? I let the blind drop and hurried downstairs, turning off lights as I went. I sat in the dark living room, phone in hand, debating whether to call 911. But what would I say? An old lady rang my doorbell, and now someone's tapping on my window. It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. The doorbell rang again, but this time it was accompanied by knocking. Not just knocking, pounding. My palms were sweating as I gripped the phone tighter. I decided to peek through the front window to see who was there. This time, a man stood on the porch. He was younger than the woman, maybe in his 50s, wearing a brown leather jacket. He looked anxious, running his hands through his graying hair. "I'm sorry to bother you," he called through the door. "I'm looking for my mother." An older lady. She was wearing a blue sweater. My guard lowered slightly. She was here about 30 minutes ago. She said her car broke down and wanted to use the phone. "That's her," he said, relief washing over his face. "She has Alzheimer's and sometimes wanders off." "Did you let her use the phone?" "No, I told her to go to the pharmacy." He nodded. "Listen, I'm sorry to ask, but could I come in for just a minute to call the police? I'm worried she might have gotten lost or confused." Red flags went up in my mind. Why did he need to come inside? "You can use the phone from out there," I said. "I can bring you a cordless phone if you don't have a cell." He seemed taken aback for a moment, then said, "Of course, that's fine." "Thank you." I went to get the cordless phone from the kitchen. As I returned, I happened to glance out the back window. My heart stopped. The man wasn't where I'd left him on the porch. Scanning the yard, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The old woman was in our backyard, and she wasn't alone. Through the window, I watched in horror as both of them crept toward the house, trying doorknobs and windows. The man was checking the sliding glass door, while the woman had something in her hand. It glinted in the moonlight. A knife. I retreated from the window and ran back upstairs to my room, my heart pounding. I needed my phone to call 911. As I grabbed it from my desk, the tapping at my window started again. But this time it was violent. The entire window shook with each hit. I dove behind my bed, phone in hand, and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. 911, what's your emergency? There are people trying to break into my house, I whispered frantically. They're trying to get in through my window. What's your address? I gave her the address and explained the situation as quickly as I could while the banging on my window continued. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. They're breaking in, I screamed into the phone. Stay where you are. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. The operator kept talking, but I could barely focus on her words. I could hear footsteps in the house now, first downstairs, then on the stairs. I pushed myself further back under my bed, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. The doorknob turned slowly. I held my breath, my entire body trembling. The door creaked open. I know you're in here, a woman's voice said sweetly. Come out, come out. I could see feet, black shoes with thick soles, walking slowly around my room. They stopped at my bed. I heard her kneel down. Found you, she whispered. A hand reached under the bed, but at that exact moment, sirens wailed in the distance. The feet quickly retreated, and I heard running footsteps down the stairs and the sound of the back door slamming. The police arrived within minutes. They found the window in my room had been smashed, and the screen had been cut. The woman and man had fled, leaving behind only the knife she'd been carrying. An officer stayed with me until my parents rushed home from Cleveland. The police launched an investigation, but never caught the pair. They suspected it was a well-orchestrated home invasion attempt, possibly a mother-son team that targeted houses where they knew young people were alone. My parents praised my decision not to let them in the house, saying it probably saved my life. But even now, years later, I still wonder about that night. The way they worked together, the way they knew exactly what to say to try to gain entry, the persistence even after being turned away. It all points to something much more sinister than a confused elderly woman with Alzheimer's. I moved away for college the following year, but I still have nightmares about that night. Sometimes I wake up thinking I can hear tapping at my window, only to realize it's just the wind. But I never open the door for strangers anymore, no matter how harmless they might seem. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.